Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com.
Welcome to Something to Wrestle With.
Something to wrestle with.
Bruce Prichard.
Well, you know.
That's not a rib.
She pooted.
Is that a rib?
No, yeah, but
There's no box of gimmicks.
Rumor and innuendo.
I don't deal in rumor and innuendo. And was he there? I was there.
Say something about
I don't give a shit. I ain't scared.
I ain't scared of shit.
Fuck him.
You, Bruce.
I love
You take the double cheeseburger. You take the bread. Double cheese. Well, you know. And then double mayo. You know, it's called chicken salad. Double onion, motherfucker.
You're nothing but an egg-sucking dog.
Throw it in your Google machine.
Goddamn, kid. God damn it. What the hell show you got there? I need more. Ooh, yeah.
What say you?
Pronouns, pal.
And now, something to wrestle with. Con Bruce Prichard.
The second most recognizable athlete in the entire world today.
Conrad Thompson.
What happened when? What would Vince say about that?
Well, hey, Vince. To the Gosh, your arms look good tonight. Yeah. You're so big. Yeah. Let's go.
Bullshit.
Welcome to WrestleMania.
Roll tide on that.
Welcome to Something to Wrestle With.
Something to wrestle
Something
with.
to wrestle with.
Something to wrestle with. Bruce Prichard.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Something to Wrestle With Bruce Prichard. Bruce, what's going on, man? How are you?
Howdy, 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 hey. Howdy, 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 ho.
Our subject today, Bruce, Andre the Giant. We have talked about doing this show for years. Let's talk about Andre, man. You know what? Let's do it in reverse order. We've got so much to talk about with Andre. He's got this incredible story. Usually we tell you his whole biography and then we do questions at the end. But dude, we just tweeted asking for questions yesterday, like less than a day ago. We've got hundreds. People are pumped about Andre. Efren says there's a famous story with Bad News Brown confronting Andre over some inappropriate comments. Do you have any other stories of someone confronting Andre over views he spouted? That's kind of an interesting question, Bruce, because we've often heard that Andre was, you know, obviously a massive human being and he was the boss. Did anybody ever try to step up to Andre that you recall?
No, I don't. You know, Andre was so damn massive and he was the boss. There was so much respect for Andre, and Andre was deceptively strong as well. You know, the thought of Andre actually working out in a gym and doing some resistance and weight training, I think would have been just a recipe for disaster.
Right.
Because Andre was already just naturally strong and he, good Lord, man, it was unbelievable. So he never really worked out. Didn't have to.
Adam says Andre said he turned down the surgery to fix his pituitary gland tumor. He thought that his size was the will of God. Do you remember Paul Bosch, Vince Sr., or Vince ever trying to change his mind to lengthen his longevity?
Well, the surgery, to my knowledge, didn't really come across his plate until much later in his life. So Andre kind of felt that this is what he was, this is who he was, that was his identity, and anything to just go in and try and change his genetic makeup, he wasn't really fond of, wasn't something that he wanted to address.
Here's one you can probably have fun with. This comes to us from Nick the Norseman. Shout out to Nick, friend of the show. Did he have any good pickup lines?
Want to fuck?
Oh God.
Hey man, when you're 7'4" and 500 pounds and look like Andre, I mean, do you really need a pickup line?
We did get lots of questions like that.
Want
about
to
that.
see it?
Want to feed it a peanut?
Yeah.
Sean says, we've all heard the stories of Flair and Wilt Chamberlain having a lot of fun with the ladies. Any stories of the ladies going one-on-one with the eighth wonder of the world? Owen wanted to know, town to town, day by day, how was Andre with the women? We got inundated with Andre the ladies man questions. Do you have anything you can share with us?
You know, as far as I know, Andre was quite the ladies' man, and he always seemed to. I never saw him with a very large woman. And what I mean by that is not large, you know, like, but I never saw him with a tall woman. It was usually very dainty and very small, which just kind of led the imagination to run wild and go crazy a little bit.
Charlie Thrower wants to know, what would it sound like if Jerry Jarrett had called Vince Sr. to book the Giant for Memphis?
Huh? Vince, it's Jerry. Huh? Oh, Jared. Well, you know. No, Memphis. Yeah. Yes, bullshit. Oh yeah, I know. Yes. Is Andre available for a couple dates? You know, the Giant. Huh? Well, I got a little feller down here. Well, you know, the king. Huh? What? Yeah, I thought you paid him. Okay. All right. Yeah. He'll go over. Bye. Jerry, we need to beat the Giant.
You think a lot of promoters, I mean, I know you're just saying that to be funny, but back then, of course, finishes were a huge deal. Maybe not as much anymore. That's to be debated for another show. But when you're loaning out an attraction like that, I think some promoters would probably think, well, if I'm paying all that money, I got to use it to get over my other talent. And whoever was booking said attraction may think, oh no, we have the finish negotiated as part of the booking. Do you think anybody ever tried to agree to a finish with a promoter and then try to renegotiate it with Andre in person? Had to happen, right?
No, Andre, I think, was smart enough, and Andre always had a guy by the name of Frank Valois that traveled with him, was kind of his handler. So when Andre came into the territory, Frank would come in, Frank would handle a lot of the travel arrangements and things like that. And Andre always seemed to, at least in Texas, Andre would always travel with Bronco Lubitsch and or Danny Pletchis and someone like that, along with Frank. But Frank always got a spot on the card, always got, like preliminary pay. He got a payday for being with the Giant that night. And, you kind of dealt with Frank, but the Giant was business. I mean, Andre was business. You didn't go in and just, have Andre do a job. That's not good for your business either, to bring in a big attraction like that and then just beat him. That doesn't work either, because then he's one and done. But Andre did know the value of working a program, being able to come in and put guys over. Andre knew how to get people over being a Giant. Andre would leave good, and he would always leave the territory good, in my opinion. I think that the way that the boss did business was very professional, was a good good way to book an attraction. I remember Andre coming in, and we had a guy by the name of Killer Carl Krupp. He was French Canadian, and his gimmick was the claw, which, because Fritz ran Dallas, it seemed like we had every other fucking guy in the business that had a claw. Every heel that had a claw could come in, and it's an instant program with Fritz, the Battle of the Iron Claw versus the Black Claw or whatever. So Krupp had this claw, and Carl Krupp was, the question was, can Krupp get the claw on the Giant's head? What's he going to do? And what Krupp did, and again, people sit there and they think about it today. They go, "Oh man, that's a spot. That's fucking shit." No, it was great psychology, and it told a story that you actually believed because you demonstrated it. What Krupp did is he applied the claw to half the face. Instead of going temple to temple, he went nose to temple, and then he would dig his thumb into the Giant's eye. And fucking Andre would sell that son of a bitch like $1 million. And so the controversy was, is it an eye claw? Is it an eye gouge? Or is it, Krupp said, he goes, look, I just adapted my claw to do half the face. And it's so powerful that half of the claw on half of Andre's head was enough to beat him. And Andre sold that son of a bitch like crazy. But then, Andre came back with some kind of protective wear over his eye, and Krupp wasn't able to put the thumb in the eye, and Andre beat him. And they got 2 out of it. It's just, Andre worked with Harley, put Harley over. Andre would come in and he'd work with Gino and shit and have returns, because that's what you do. It was business. It wasn't, and we had a lot of gaga finishes and shit.
Let's do another question here. Pender J wants to know, why was Andre so hateful towards Big John Studd? Did Andre not understand it was more McMahon's direction to have him called Giant John Studd?
Well, I think that in general, anybody that showed fear, I guess, is one way of looking at it with Andre, that Andre didn't like that. It was like, come on, man, be a man. But Studd, more than anything, I think that there was a little bit of, I don't want to say jealousy, because that's not the right word. It just was more along the lines of, Andre really didn't care for big guys that wanted to trade off on, I'm a real giant. Andre felt he was the only giant, felt that was his gimmick, and that people shouldn't infringe on his gimmick. Go be Big John Studd, but don't be Giant John Studd. And I think that their personalities just kind of rubbed the wrong way when Andre, I think that Andre would probably do stuff more with a smaller guy like Harley Race than he would with a big guy. It's funny.
Why do you think that is?
Maybe just personality wise, maybe he liked Harley more, and maybe he just thought that they were working harder. I don't really know. I think bottom line, it was a personality thing. If Andre liked you, he'd do anything in the world for you.
Dave wants to know, do you think Andre did not like Randy Savage because of how overprotective he was of Elizabeth?
No, that's not why at all. I just think that in general, Andre did not care for Randy. Maybe it had to do, and who really knows on that one, but maybe it went back to Angelo and the being opposition for many years against some of the major territories that Andre was friendly with. And I don't know that Randy didn't go out of his way either to make friends with anybody. So Andre's not going to go out of his way. Randy's not going to go out of his way. But Andre would do what he needed to do when it came time to handling Randy and do whatever it is. But I don't think he hated him.
Let's talk about Oliver's Bar. Steve Patty. Oh, one of the Save with Conrad.com crew. says, did you ever go to Oliver's Bar in White Plains with Andre?
No, I did not. I used to go to the French restaurant there in Greenwich, where the piano was, from time to time, and go by and have a drink with Andre. But the trick there was to get out, either get out before they ordered or immediately upon finishing. Because if you didn't, it would be ugly.
You just stay there drinking all night?
Oh yes, you would. They would carry you out. Because Andre used to love to sit there with the guy playing the piano and sing and all kinds of shit. And he used to sing, "Spend my days working hard on the go. Hands on clock, go slow. I want my baby tonight."
Robert wants to know, did you ever take Andre out on the town when he came to Houston? And if so, where was his favorite spot to go?
Andre, when he used to come to Houston back in the day, would come in with the Dallas office. And whenever Andre came to town, the first thing that would come through the door that you knew Andre had arrived was a gigantic ice chest full of beer and wine. And Bronco and whoever would carry the ice chest in, and then Andre would come in from behind. And that was it. Andre would sit, but Andre would always be moving on to whatever the next town was in Dallas. Andre didn't have the opportunity a lot of times to stay, but the only time that I knew, oh fuck man, it's where the Flamingos were. I'll find out for you by the end of this. I'm texting somebody right now.
Deplorable Hombre wants to know, who had a worse fart, Vince McMahon or Andre the Giant?
Andre wins.
Can you compare? Can you give us a flavor? Be our fart sommelier here. Describe an Andre fart and what made it different from normal human farts.
Kind of like, wow, just fucking rancid ass. Can you imagine when those gates of hell explode?
Like the bass. Let's talk about the bass. Did it have more bass than an Andre? I mean, than a Dusty Rhodes fart?
Definitely more bass than a Dusty fart, but yeah, but they were also kind of, it was like a nuclear bomb going off, more or less.
A nuclear bomb. You have a lot of experience with that. Okay.
Yeah.
Luke wants to know, any memories of Andre being arrested in Cedar Rapids? The local paper wrote an editorial on it. Being from here, it was always a cool story to tell. What was Vince's reaction?
Not much. I mean, it was, look, if Andre wanted to be uncooperative and shit, it could have been a much bigger story, but it was, it was the grumpy years. And I think that was during the time that Andre really didn't care. And the last few years of his life, and I'm going to go on and probably say the last 4 or 5 years of his life, I think that Andre's pain tolerance was lessening, and that Andre was in an awful lot of pain and just kind of said, fuck it. You know how I get sometimes, Conrad?
Yes.
Where I'm just at the end.
Yep.
And I say, fuck it.
Yep.
That's how Andre was for about 5 years. Is that your dogs or my dogs?
Those are your dogs. Adam wants to know, does Bruce think that the WWE made a mistake only putting the belt on Andre for him to give it straight to the $1 Million Man? I guess the context of what he's saying here, Bruce, is, do you think in hindsight, it might've been nice to let Andre be the champ?
I think it would have been nice to have Andre be the champion for a while. And, that's hindsight. At the time, I thought it was one of the greatest stories in the history of the business.
Matthew says, aside from guys who snuck off to Hollywood, do you think it's possible to ever have another wrestler be a once in a while attraction like Andre was?
Yeah, I think there've been several. I mean, I think Undertaker fits that bill. And, yeah, there have been, and I think will continue to be.
Mike wants to know, Andre's drinking is now legendary. Was Andre's drinking ever a problem for Vince? Was he ever unable to perform? Does Bruce have any fantastic Andre drinking stories?
Well, there was one that we told the other day about, with Pat Patterson, where Andre had passed out, and they had to put the tablecloth on Andre and just left him in the middle of the lobby of the hotel because they couldn't move him, and he wasn't getting up, and nobody else was going to stay up. I think one of the other was Andre had been out all night, and Bobby Heenan tells the story of traveling with Andre during that time, and Flair almost killed him, but before that, Andre almost killed him with the drinking, because Andre would get in the first class and he would sit there and go, Bobby, you like vodka? I was like, yes, I like vodka. You like apple juice? Sure, I like apple juice. Ever have vodka and apple juice? And he's like, no, man, it doesn't, just for whatever reason, doesn't sound good. He goes, we try. Vodka apple juice. And the flight attendant brings them the vodka and the apple juice and shit, and Bobby doesn't like it, but Andre goes ahead and drinks it. And just because he started it, he finished it, and he kept drinking vodka apple juice, and I guess it didn't set well with him. And they come out, and as Bobby Heenan tells the story, they're standing on one, like on the side of the street on the curb, and there's a couple lanes of traffic, and then on the other side of the other lanes of traffic is another like island and curb and shit, and a taxi cab. And Andre is trying to hail the taxi cab, and he goes, man, he says, all you saw was Andre raise his hand and go, taxi. And then the next thing you saw was, and Andre puked across 2 lanes of traffic, like all the way to the second island. He said it was unlike anything he had ever seen. And the cars going by came to a screeching halt as Andre puke was smeared all over their fucking windshields and shit. And Andre just looked down and goes, uh-oh. Bobby's like thinking he's going, uh-oh, because he smeared puke all over these fucking cars. And what are they going to do? A giant just puked on you. Well, what are you going to do? And he goes, I got some on my shoe. Andre was so saying, he goes, I looked down and sure enough, on the fucking Herman Munsters, he's fucking puked a fucking buffet full of food and fucking vodka and apple juice across all these cars. But he had one tiny spot on his Herman Munsters, and he was upset.
What is a Herman Munster?
His shoes. You don't know who Herman Munster is?
I do that, but I didn't know he had a specific type of shoes.
Yeah, giant shoes, because Herman was...
But I thought he wore like lifts. Like Andre didn't have lifts.
No, but...
I got you.
Damn it.
I'm busting your balls.
He's big.
Oh, copy.
So they're Herman Munsters.
So did Andre... Was he ever unable to perform? Did Vince ever feel like he needed to get involved?
No, never. Andre, I don't think Andre... Well, he was, but... I was going to say, I don't think Andre was an alcoholic, but I think he drank all the time to kind of cover the pain. But Andre didn't drink in excess to the point of getting drunk really until after his matches and shit.
Matt has a question about Andre's daughter. He says, was Andre aware of who the mother of his daughter was? And was he ever in her life? Sort of a weird question. Extra weird phrasing, but chat me up. Do you know anything of Andre's relationship with his daughter?
Nothing at all. I know that they got to at least meet, and he knew of the daughter, but I have no idea about her mother or anything else about her, other than she inherited his estate.
Right.
And that, in later years, that was something that Andre was very happy for, that he did get to meet his daughter.
Everybody has questions about Super Machine, Giant Machine. There was this machine era of the WWF, and I know that predates
Japan.
Yes. I know it was, it sort of predates your tenure, but what can you tell us about Giant Machine?
Well, some people say that it was Andre the Giant.
And you're not so sure, but
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure, man. I'm not so sure.
some of our younger listeners have no idea what we're even talking about. Can you explain the machine concept?
Well, the machine concept was basically very similar to the Midnight Rider concept and to the old, what was the other one? Dirty Yellow Dog concept, where popular attractions such like the American Dream Dusty Rhodes loses a loser leave town match, must leave town. Therefore, they cannot go back and they cannot participate in the town in which they were accustomed to. When all of a sudden a new talent would arrive on the scene. In this particular case, it'd be the Midnight Rider. I've got $1 I ain't gonna let him take me, no, I ain't gonna let him take the Midnight Rider.
All right, we're talking about giant machine here.
So I'm getting there, God damn it. So the Midnight Rider had a lisp and talk a little bit like this. And he would sit around the fireplace and all, and he would sip a few beers and talk about the legend of the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, and it rode through here one time. And the Dream and the Rider became very good friends, if you will. Almost like I became a little bit of the Dream. So I feel it's my place to come back now and avenge the Dream. Some people thought that the Rider actually was the American Dream Dusty Rhodes because he embodied the same spirit, if you will. He looked a lot, had an extra lot of puppy skin and a gigantic birthmark in the same place, but I believe that was just self-inflicted to feel the spin. Andre the Giant later on, when he was banned and he was gone, never to appear again, as many things from the land of the rising sun do. They create. And all of a sudden, with a stamp made in Japan, giant machine appeared. 7'4", 459 pounds. And a lot of people thought that was Andre the Giant. When in fact, it was manufactured, made in Japan, if you will, of giant materials. Therefore, people felt the giant machine and Andre the Giant, just because one got the same last name, the other got the same first name. Giant machine, Andre the Giant. They put the two together, thinking they were the same. Just because it had embodied the spirit of Andre the Giant.
David Hogan wants to know, the 1989 feud with the Ultimate Warrior could have been so much more. I attended 2 shows in Chicago with both main events being with them. On both, the Warrior knocked Andre out of the ring and won in seconds. Why the choice to keep doing this?
Well, no, I doubt we did it twice. I know we did it the first time.
Well, once was probably on TV, once was a house show.
No, but I mean, I don't know. No, I mean, we only did that finish one time in each market, and there was a fear. It was an experiment, and it was Andre's idea to get the Ultimate Warrior over. I get him over. I can do it. Boom! I take clothesline. I wrap in ropes. 1, 2, 3 count out. Easy.
Stuart Walter, my apologies, says, what was Andre's favorite dish? I know this question comes to us because we've talked about Yokozuna's turkey tails or turkey ass or whatever you call it. What about Andre? We've heard that he liked the French restaurant, but what was his favorite dish?
It's fucking, pretty much anything French. A lot of the, like the French use a lot of liver and gizzards and shit like that. Internal organs. Andre loved that shit. Very much so.
Didn't know what to expect there. Ace wants to know, you think Andre knew
About
how?
like inside innards or gizzards or what?
I just wouldn't have called that. You know, he was a big Chitlins fan.
Tastes like shit.
Ace wants to know, do you think Andre knew how big of a deal WrestleMania 3 would be in a historical context? If Hogan wasn't top draw at the time, who do you think Andre would work with on a major level? Do you have any matchups with Andre you could think of that we were never able to see happen? So a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the first one. WrestleMania 3. Nobody knew really how significant it would be. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, we do. We knew it was the biggest show, but it's become much more than that.
I think they did know. I think that at the time, at the height of WrestleMania 3, there was no bigger match in the book for anybody. And I believe that that Hulk and Andre both felt that same way. This now, as you talk, 2020 vision, yeah, it's much bigger than anyone could have thought of then. But on the way there, yeah, I think they knew that that was the attraction. That was, Tyson Ali. I don't think there was a bigger attraction in the book anywhere at that time.
Hypothetically, if Andre would have had a different whole new set of circumstances, we're reshuffling the deck, and for whatever reason, Vince is going to go, I don't know, Hogan Orndorff in the main event. What do you think that would have put Andre on the card? It's hard to even fantasy book that, isn't it?
Yeah, because I don't think that he would have been on the card at that point.
So if he wasn't in the main event, he's not in it.
I don't know that there was another opponent for him for that particular attraction that would have made any difference at all.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you could have done Bundy, but that would not have been great.
Bundy, you stealing money, Bundy. Every time you go cash a check, you stealing money. They'll put you in jail, Bundy.
We haven't talked about Bundy. We've talked about Stud. What was Bundy's relationship like with Andre?
I don't know that they had a bad relationship. I think that actually Andre kind of put up with Bundy, and I don't know that one way or another they really cared, too much to one side or not. I do love the Uncle Elmer story, though, where Bobby Heenan is sitting in the dressing room and Uncle Elmer comes over and says, Bobby, why don't Andre like me? And he says, well, shit, Elmer, what makes you think Andre doesn't like you? He told me so. Bobby says, well, Elmer, I'd stay the fuck away from him then. I don't know, but my advice is stay the fuck away from him. So he would tell you.
Instagram, a wrestling historian, wants to know, when would have Bruce Prichard booked the dream match of Bruno Sammartino versus Andre the Giant, and who goes over? So hypothetical, Bruno, sort of the old guard, pre-Hogan, Andre the Giant, the attraction who never quote unquote needed the belt. What do you think happens there?
Back in the day, Bruno probably would have gone over.
So that's why they didn't book it. They didn't want to ruin the mystique or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know that Bruno needed it though.
Right.
But I think that if you were to take that as a dream match of the 70s with both of them at the height of their popularity, that you would have had to put Bruno over.
Well, we got lots of questions about this. It feels funny to even ask, but Loftus wants to know, was Andre able to use a standard size toilet, and how did that work?
It depended on how much room that he had, because, Andre, as tall as he was also equally wide, being a giant, all things proportionate. And Andre was able to use toilets from time to time, but had a lot of problems in Japan. He couldn't use those damn toilets in Japan because they were a lot smaller and in a much more narrow space, so that he wasn't able to do his business.
And I believe, as the story goes, he did tub plops over there and then would, put out newspapers some of the time on the floor,
Yeah.
right?
Just put out the newspaper and take a dump, and then carefully put the newspaper with the dump in the drawers and the dressers.
The dressers. Why
Well,
would,
where are you going to put it?
well, I'd probably take it downstairs and put it in a trash can.
So you're going to carry
I'm not going to leave the turd in the room with me,
a
Bruce.
fucking newspaper full of shit.
Well, here's the thing. Even Andre could have just put it outside his door.
Well, that would be rude.
Oh, it's not rude to put your shit in a drawer?
Well, it's getting it out of the way.
Well, it's out of the way in the hallway too.
Oh, you might step in it out there.
Well, nobody will step
You
in
ever
it.
get giant shit on your shoe?
Wait, you've had that?
Oh, yeah.
Andre shit your shoes once?
No, but I've gotten giant shit on my shoe.
How does that happen?
You step in giant shit.
I got that. Do you want to give any
Don't want to
context?
step in a bunch of giant shit.
Bobby Rhodes writes in, it's alleged that Kamala brought a pistol to a Mid-South show and was ready to shoot Andre for using the N-word in a match. Can you validate any heat between the two? Also, did Andre have any other heat like this with other wrestlers?
You know, I heard that in later years. If there was heat, they sure as hell worked really well together for many years.
Well, I'm sure from Kamala's side, it's like, yeah, you can make a big stink out of this and not be booked on the same card as Andre, or you can try to figure out how to make peace. And I assume he confronted him and cooler heads prevailed and they never had an issue again. Just freestyle.
No, I mean, and again, in later years, they worked together. So,
Right. All right. Well, let's keep it moving here. We got tons of questions today. This one comes into us from Monster Mailman. He says, how did Andre end up doing a commercial for honeycombs? And why didn't he do the voice? It was dubbed.
honeycomb big. Yeah. It not small. Yeah. Hey, that was his voice for some of it. I know the end of it was dubbed over. But they did use his voice for some of it. And yeah, it was giant, man. Honeycomb was giant. So they needed a giant. I think that was post
Yeah.
Princess Bride. So it was kind of off that fame as well.
Jarvis says, was it hard to sign Andre to an exclusive contract when he came to the WWF in the mid 80s? Or was there some pushback from the fact that he couldn't work in the territories as he had been doing up to that point? I know you weren't there, but I'm sure it's something you're at least aware of.
Well, but you still booked Andre even before the 80s. You booked Andre through Vince McMahon Sr. So Andre did have a contract with Vince Sr. and did, whether it was a handshake contract or not, it was, the bookings went through Vince. But, you know, the funny thing about it is back in the day, Andre knew who he wanted to work with. And if Andre wanted to work somewhere, Vince wasn't going to tell him no.
Right.
So if you could be sitting with Andre and say, hey, boss, I've got, can we look at some dates? I've got, date here, coming up in the next year or two. Andre would write in his book, Houston, Beaumont, whatever. And that was it. He was going to be there. You could count on him. Write down in your book the dates on Andre, and you could talk to him that night and not see him again for another 6 months and feel confident that he would be there on that date in 6 months.
Wow, man, that's impressive.
But that's the way that you did business back then with like a lot of the top stars. Superstar Billy Graham would come in and just do Houston. Paul would get dates on him and just write them down. Moskowitz, the same thing. They would just write dates down and, okay, I got it in my book, and they would be there.
Landon wants to know, did Vince already have the idea to start the Hall of Fame before Andre passed away? Had Andre lived longer, would he still have been the first ever inductee?
At that time, we had been talking about doing a Hall of Fame, and it was unfortunate Andre's passing, but I think that kind of sped it up, because if there was ever anybody that was worthy of being the first inductee into the Hall of Fame, it was Andre the Giant.
Yeah, I don't think that's debatable. Gary says, who came up with the name Colossal Connection for him and Haku? And was anyone else ever considered to be Andre's partner? Why was Haku the right choice?
They liked each other, first of all. Andre and Haku really liked each other personally. They both were part of the Bobby Heenan family. And I think it was Howard Finkel, actually, that came up with Colossal Connection.
Huh.
They both were colossal, and they had a connection. You know what I'm saying?
Juan
Therefore,
says,
you get Colossal Connection.
Bobby Rhodes wants to know, how did Andre end up in Herb Abrams' UWF?
Well, I don't know, man. I think that there was a period of time after Andre left that there were some hard feelings between Andre and Vince, and that Andre could be childlike in some ways, and just, you know, if Andre were hurt, he wanted to hurt those that hurt him. And I think that Andre just kind of got sold a bill of goods and went and did it out of spite.
I mean, the UWF was a spite store, but that's maybe a story for another time. Mike says, we always hear the great fart story from Princess Bride. Do you have any good Andre fart stories?
Andre could clear a room, man. And you didn't always hear them. They could be silent and deadly. But what would happen is you would see Andre start to move up and down, and he would start to chuckle inside, and he would try and hold it. And right about the time you see him moving, and now, by the way, that's releasing more of that pungent air from underneath his anal cavity. And you realize, the boss just farted. It was ugly. You needed them tear gas. You needed them gas masks and shit, because it would tear you up.
Is it true that Andre kept this tape of Princess Bride and watched it all the time and loved showing new people when they'd come visit, hey, let's watch this movie? And it was always Princess Bride.
Oh, I have no idea. No clue. I would if I was in that.
Yeah.
Hello, lady.
Juan wants to know, back in the day, were there certain territories that would only use Andre as a heel just to sort of fit the narrative of the big scary guy?
I don't know of any territory except for Japan and maybe Mexico that ever did use Andre as a heel.
He was always just the friendly, loving giant.
Oh, he's big, friendly, loving giant. I can tell you the name of the restaurant in Houston was Vargo's, that he liked when he would go to Houston.
Oh, okay. I was like, all right.
Had flamingos and shit. I think it's closed now.
Bobby wants to know, did Bruce ever play cards with Andre? Any good stories about playing cards with Andre?
No, that was an eclectic group, man. That was Arnie Skolin. That was Pat Patterson. Can't think of too many. Tim White. But I didn't play cribbage, so I didn't know how to play. But it was, yeah, you kind of had to be in that inner circle there, and willing to lose money. Play with the boss.
And willing to lose money is the big one.
And willing to lose money, damn right, because you weren't going over. That's for damn sure.
You know, you talked about money there. Are these guys playing? Is this a high stakes game, or is it just for fun? I mean, these are $50 games, or these are $5,000 games?
Oh, no. These are like $50 games. These are more bragging rights and taking money from the cheap bastards in the locker room. It was always fun to get Arnie Skolin to dig into his pocket, but that rarely happened. Arnie beat everybody.
I guess the question is that, was there ever like a situation where maybe somebody owed Andre some money that they didn't really have?
No, I don't think that ever happened. I think the funniest poker story though was Gorilla Monsoon, and Gorilla Monsoon used to love Gorilla wanted, especially man when Gino was very sick in the end, man. Gino would take action on how many rings it would take before someone would pick up a phone call. Gorilla was addicted to betting. Gorilla loved gambling. And in the early days, he loved to play poker. And Bull Ramos, who was Manuel Bull Ramos from Houston, Texas, was a decent star in the Northeast and used to travel with Gino. And they would play cards in the back. And one day, Gino invited Bull to his house. And Gorilla had just put in this beautiful, brand new game room, kind of off the basement. And went down and all this shit. And he says, Bull, I want to show you my game room. And come on down and we'll play some cards. And Bull's sitting there. He goes, here, have a seat right here. And sits him down, and they're playing cards. And he goes, what do you think of the game room, Bull? And he says, God damn, Gino, this is really, really nice. This is nice. He goes, did you see the plaque behind you? And he goes, no, what are you talking about? And Bull turns around, and there was a plaque on the wall thanking Bull Ramos for paying for his game room, being the world's shittiest poker player. To which Bull took offense and left and got mad. Imagine that.
Albert says Bobby Heenan in WCW was asked who the greatest wrestler he ever managed. Without missing a beat, he said Andre the Giant. Did Bobby go off script? How did Bobby and Vince take the news of Andre's passing? Of course, you wouldn't know what the script was, but certainly the script wouldn't call for him to put over a WWF talent. He was just putting a guy over, his friend over. But we didn't talk about how Vince and Bobby took the news of Andre's passing.
Vince took it hard. They were the same age. Vince and Andre were the same age and had birthdays that were fairly close together. And Vince considered Andre one of his best friends and really hated the falling out that they had. So I think there was a little bit of regret that hadn't been completely rectified and that he didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye to his friend.
This is, I don't know. Sucks always talking about death in wrestling. Let's talk about something fun. Owen says, how much or how often would Andre intake food daily? We've all heard the famous stories of his drinking habits, but I have never really heard any crazy eating stories, but I'm sure there are plenty.
When Andre would sit down to, so for example, at the place in Greenwich, he did eat quantity, I guess, when you really think about it. Andre ate a lot of food, but he was also a superhuman sized man. But I don't know that it was a grotesque amount, but when he ate big. Yeah. Andre liked his food and would definitely eat a whole lot of it when it was time, but I don't know that he ate all day and didn't eat shit really.
Did you ever travel with Andre?
No, just on a plane, but never traveled with Andre in the car. Andre had a special van, like those old school. I forget what the fuck they called them, but it had big captain's chairs in the back and everything. So they had specially made big captain's chair for Andre in the back. And Timmy White and Arnie Skolin and Pat and a lot of different guys would travel with them. They'd play cards in the back and just chill out. So it was pretty easy for him. I don't know if I've ever told the story on here, but it was, Andre he could only fly first class. And if he had to fly on planes that didn't have any first class, he always had to sit in that front bulkhead row and take three seats, just because he was so damn big. But one day Andre was getting onto the plane in first class, and he's kind of messing with the divider in between the two seats there. And the flight attendant came by and said, "Can I get you anything?" And he said, screwdriver. Andre gets into his seat and settling down, and flight attendant is coming, handing out drinks to everybody, and she hands Andre a Phillips head screwdriver. And Andre takes the screwdriver and says, what's this? He says, well, you said you needed a screwdriver. And Andre thinks for a minute. He says, what would you bring me if I ask you for Bloody Mary? Yep.
Bobby wants to know, how much did Andre grow between his start with the WWF and his departure? It's sort of a silly question, but I guess with Andre, maybe there is no such thing as a silly question. Did he get taller or just heavier during his WWF run?
Andre definitely got heavier, taller. If he were to be able to stand up straight, who really knows? But in later years, Andre was a little bit more hunched over, so his 7'4" frame was not as tall. When he would stand up straight, yes, he was. But I think just because of the nature of some of the pain and different things that he was going through with his back and his knees and everything, that it became harder for him to stand up straight all the time. And so he was a little hunched over, but he did put on an awful lot of weight.
Denby says, when was the exact month that was decided for Andre to turn heel? I know he was suspended to film Princess Bride, and when his name finally resurfaced in fall of '86, Heenan's name is talked about in his reinstatement meetings. Did y'all know back in the summer of '86? Just curious. Now, of course, you weren't there just yet, but we're talking about the build for WrestleMania III. And we know that very early in '87, we're going to establish that, hey, we're about to go that direction. And to your point earlier, Andre had always been the super baby face. Has Vince ever told you when he decided, okay, now's the time, here's the right opponent, this is the right story?
It was, I want to say that it was right after WrestleMania II that Vince, was kind of looking around and going, who the hell do you put Hogan against?
Right. What next?
That's a mega attraction. That, was something, try to give them something that they hadn't seen before. Now, they had seen Hogan and Andre obviously before in Shea Stadium. Shep Watts had it on a Superdome show, and Hulk and Andre worked a program in reverse roles where Andre was the babyface and Hogan was the heel. This was an opportunity to have and Hogan had never beat Andre. So this was an opportunity to have that mega heel that you're really going to wonder, what the hell are they going to do?
Right.
And although, look, Andre did do jobs, and Andre, I don't know that Andre was ever pinned outright, may have been. I think Harley may have pinned him, but Andre didn't do a lot of jobs. So the aura of an undefeated Andre the Giant was something that was attractive and that the general population probably didn't know.
Ian says Andre was billed at 7'4". I've heard Conrad once say he thought Big Show was bigger than Andre though. How tall was Andre really? I know that's a silly question. It's not like you ever broke out a tape measure, but you met him. If you had to take a guess.
Andre was bigger. Andre was definitely bigger than Big Show. Not to say the Big Show's a small man. Big Show is fucking huge. I'll tweet out a picture of me when I was 16 years old with Andre, and it's Andre with no shoes on, and then me and Big Show from like 2004 or something like that.
We got lots of questions about this. Brian wants to know, what were the bad memories that Vince alluded to at the end of the HBO documentary? I know you didn't just sit down and watch it, so let me try to add some context to the best of my recollection. Vince obviously got really choked up talking about Andre on that HBO documentary. And he talked about how he was special. And he also talked about how their relationship got strained towards the end, and his feelings were hurt when he would show up for the UWF or he would show up for WCW. And I think you sort of alluded to the fact that Andre's feelings were hurt and these guys were just really close to one another and just not communicating, et cetera, et cetera. Is that sort of the gist of the hurt feelings or the hard feelings, or was there more to it than that between those two?
No, I think that was it. I think that it was they had been friends for so long, and to reach that point of not communicating with one another, and to reach the point where you didn't get to say goodbye to a friend, that's just hard to do. I think that's just what he was referring to.
I'm going to ask a weird question here, so bear with me as I try to give it some context. Was Andre taking those bookings for Herb Abrams and WCW because he needed to or because he wanted to? I mean, I know that sounds silly, but sometimes we have conversations about guys who made $10 million a year and managed to spend 11 somehow. And so they just found themselves in a spot where it was easy come, easy go, their relationship with money. And later in life, they just needed the payday. Or was it a matter of Andre he was enjoying what he was doing. He wasn't ready to retire. So it wasn't a money issue. It was a love of the game. I want to contribute. I like being on the team sort of thing.
I just think it was a moment in time. And I can't speak to the Herb Abrams thing. I couldn't tell you what would possess him to have done that. However, with the WCW thing and the legend stuff, Andre was close to Dusty. Andre was close to Bill Watts and Bruno and those guys. So I could have seen Dusty making that call and talking him into it. And Watts making the call and talking him into it. And Andre doing it just as a thing to do for them.
Ben wants to know, were there ever any interactions between Andre and Taker that exist in photos or videos that you know of?
Not that I know of. And I think that, Taker may have been a big guy that Andre would have liked. I think that Andre really would have liked Taker.
Anthony says, I'd love to hear a great story about him and his dear friend, Tim White. Of course, most of our listeners probably remember Tim, legendary WWE referee. Then they did that rather regrettable suicide skit on Monday Night Raw back in the day. But in real life, he was a great close personal friend of Andre, and at times almost like his personal guy. I don't want to say personal assistant, but a real traveling companion, right?
Yeah. Timmy started with the company, and he was a part of our international crew that would go over when the international travel was in its infancy. And Tim would go to UK, go to Europe, Germany, France, what have you, as an advanced guy. And then Tim would travel with like either Hulk or Andre, and Tim and Arnie Skolin were friends, and Tim and Andre became very good friends. So Tim would, be the one, kind of like Frank Valois was in the early goings with Andre, that Tim became the guy that would help and kind of manage Andre, make sure that he got in and out of the hotels okay, secure the travel, and get Andre around and take care of things for Andre. So they became very, very good friends that loved one another and got along great. Then later on, Timmy became a referee and did all that other stuff. But Tim and Andre was a great pairing. Tim White's one of those just good, straight, narrow stand-up guys.
Carlos says, we've always heard about how Andre enjoyed his drink, and we've also heard how Bruce was a fan of the wacky tobacco. Did Andre and Bruce ever partake together?
No, we did not. I don't know that Andre was a big fan of the old wacky tobacco, and I wasn't about to be the one to find out. Andre liked to drink. If I was around Andre in the bar, I drank with Andre. And you drank until he would let you go or you passed out.
David wants to
But
know, what was the most you ever witnessed Andre drinking in one sitting? Maybe you don't remember the number of beers or beverages, but maybe you remember the story. We were at so and so.
I remember a TV taping and Andre ordering 40 vodka grapefruits.
Like not one at a time, just
No,
starting
no,
with.
no. This was at last call.
Okay.
So this was after we had been sitting there for a while, and they did last call, and he ordered 40 drinks, and then asked for the ice on the side. And it was Andre, Pat, Vince may have been there. I was there. Arnold Skolin, and maybe one or two others. But I had been drinking with him all night long, and then it came time to go, and I'm ready to go. No, we got more, 40, and I don't know who drank them all because I tapped out. I begged for mercy, and he wasn't real happy with that, but he let me go.
You got to live.
Yeah, but it was kind of like a father being disappointed in their son. The guy, I'm done with you now, type shit.
Jason wants to know, there's a long-standing rumor that Andre, if healthier at the time, was supposed to win the 91 Royal Rumble. Any truth to that?
Oh.
John says, was there anyone who was truly afraid of Andre? We know there were people who didn't like working with him, but was there anyone who completely stayed clear of him?
Yeah, I think there were a few people. I don't think that Andre really liked the Rockers. They tried to stay clear of him. I think Jake stayed clear of him just in general. But there were a few that you just didn't want to be didn't want to be anywhere near him. Uncle Elmer. But you respected him, and I always had to go in and you paid your respects. You said hello to the boss. Then move on with your shit.
Shannon says, who had the idea for Andre to be afraid of snakes? And did he have any issues when it came to dealing with Damien?
No, not at all. I want to say that was probably either Vince or Pat at the time that came up with it, because you look at everything that you have with Andre and what can be something that could be that Achilles heel for Andre. And if he's afraid of something and we could use that, then that could work for Andre.
Ran Heart of the People says, is there anything that Mr. McMahon or the company would request a venue or hotel to do to accommodate Andre? Are there any stories you can remember where Mr. McMahon would go out of his way to make Andre happy or more comfortable?
Well, we always made sure that you had a king size bed for him at best, and always made sure that they had cars that were big enough for him, whether that be a limo or a van. And I think Andre was usually more comfortable in like a big van type thing with captain's chairs than he was sitting in a car. Even the limo was kind of hard to get up and in and out of. But a big van that he could kind of step into was a lot more comfortable for him.
Aaron has a question we would normally start our show with, but let's talk about it here. What was the first time you met Andre?
First time I met Andre, probably I was about, I don't know, maybe 12 years old, 12, 13, 14 in that range, in Houston, Texas, just as a, this is Bruce. I was a little kid, and then the picture I'll print is from when I was 16. I think I was ring announcing on this particular night, and had to get Andre for pictures for some folks with Goodwill. And I remember Andre didn't have his hair. His hair was all pulled up. He says, I'm not dressed. And I said, I think that's okay, man. And he came out in his under tights, barefoot, and his hair all pulled up, and took pictures with him. And I said, do you mind if I get one too? So I've got that next to a picture of Big Show and I at a wedding.
Two Hats wants to know, why did Andre wear face paint for a short time back in the day? Whose decision was that? And was Andre happy about it?
He wore face paint. Was that for the Warriors when he teamed with the Ultimate Warrior or Demolition or something like that?
Yeah, it was one of those where he was just another member. Yeah.
He just did it to be Andre. I wear face paint too. I don't like.
Paul says, do you think if Andre was still alive, he would have worked backstage for the company as an agent, a booker, a manager, or something like that?
Andre definitely had the mind to do it. Yes. And I don't see Andre running around and doing things, but I could definitely have seen Andre, because Andre would watch matches and traveling all over the world, picked up so much. And if you impressed Andre along the way, whether you were in Mexico or Detroit or Tokyo, wherever it was, Andre would always go back to the old man and different people and see where certain talent might be able to fit in. It's like, he sees somebody that would really fit in well in Texas. He would say, hey, there's this guy. Good Lord, he'd do good with the guys that you've got here and vice versa. And in later years, he did that a lot, to Vince, just saying, hey, here's some talent. So Andre always had ideas for other talent, and creative ideas. So he definitely would have been. He did have a very good mind.
Let's do a few more here. Chess wants to know, what's the greatest rib that Andre ever played on Bruce?
Well, it wasn't a rib, but Andre was he was a different cat. And when I started doing Brother Love, Andre had been gone for a while, and Andre came back. Hogan and Andre had both been gone for a while, and Andre came back, and he did not like Brother Love. Hated the gimmick, and had told Bruce that he didn't want to work with that guy. Told Pat he didn't want to work with that guy. Told Vince he didn't want to work with that guy. And when I was in Brother Love shit, he wouldn't talk to me. I mean, he would just, kind of grunt and not talk to me or do anything. When I was Bruce, not in my Brother Love shit, nice as could be. And everything was cool. And one day Vince was like, what's the heat with you and Andre? I said, Vince, I don't know. I said, I know he hates Brother Love.
Right.
I mean, he's told me he hates the gimmick. And he says, well, have you talked to him? I said, well, I've tried, but it's like, he's fine with me. I said, it's really weird. But I put the Brother Love shit on, and he fucking, kind of becomes an asshole. So Vince sat down, had me get dressed in my Brother Love shit, but don't put my makeup on, and don't do the hair and everything. And we sat in, and he said, Andre, he says, is there a problem here? No. He says, well, you said you don't want to do anything with Brother Love. You don't want to work with Brother Love. Why is that? I mean, what's the problem? Hey, I don't like Brother Love. Now I'm sitting right there.
Right.
He says, Bruce is, he goes, you like Bruce, right? I like Bruce. Bruce is Brother Love. No, I like Bruce. I don't like Brother Love. And
I'm not
He says,
asking this to be weird. Was Andre a big religious person? Was he offended by the gimmick?
I think he was a little offended by the gimmick. I don't know if he was really religious. I know a lot of people were offended by the gimmick and felt that it was blasphemous and what have you. Um, but Andre didn't like it. Did not fucking like it. So Vince was like, but Bruce is Brother Love. And I said, boss, this is good. I'd like for you to do something with him. He goes, it's good heat. No. So finally, we were building up to to SummerSlam 88. That's the one where Jesse Ventura was the guest referee.
Right.
And Brother Love show was going to have DiBiase and Jesse and Andre on, and I'm shitting my pants because Andre had told Vince he did not want to work with me. It basically kind of told anybody that would listen he didn't want to work with me. And now I'm dreading going to TV because I know I've got to work something out with Andre. And he was okay, but he had that look on his face like he was listening, but he wasn't going to acknowledge me as we went over the deal. But when he got out there, he puts his hand on me, and it was like, oh, God, please don't choke me, Andre. He did the thing, and Andre came back afterwards and waited for me at Gorilla and shook my hand and said, that was really great. He goes, you're really, really great. And that was one of the best days of my life because the boss had validated me.
Right.
And said I was good, said I was great, and loved it. So I work with you anytime. And I was like, good Lord, thank you, Andre. Gave him a big hug and shit. And then when the Bushwhackers, whatever, a year or two later, put all the sardines in my hair and shit, and everybody thought that was such a funny rib, ha 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 ha. And I had really long hair. And so when I came back to Gorilla, I just started shaking my head. And the sardines went all over everybody, including Andre. And he thought that was the funniest shit ever.
We got another one here. And this is one we've never really talked about. Josh wants to know, would Andre be as legendary if he started 10 to 20 years later? That's sort of fun to fantasy book. We've often talked about how guys were ahead of their time. Do you think Andre was right place, right time? If he came along later, would he have been as big of a deal?
I do think Andre definitely would have been as big of a deal if he came along later, maybe even bigger, because you would have gotten the more athletic, and really mobile Andre the Giant then during a time where there was a higher visibility. So yeah, I think Andre definitely would have been just as big, if not bigger.
Lots of stories. This is from J.R. Spires. Lots of stories about people being stiff in the ring, or Andre being stiff in the ring with people like Stud and Savage. Was there anyone ever brave enough to disrespect the boss? If so, what was the outcome? I know you've told the not the Undertaker, but the Ultimate Warrior story, where he just, put his fist out and all of a sudden he slowed down a little bit. Any other stories like that with Andre?
It's funny. John Laurinaitis was telling a story the other day about the first time that he worked with Andre in Japan. Was in a tag team match with Andre and Giant Baba against Johnny Ace and Stan Hansen. And Hansen told Johnny, he goes, as soon as you get in there, and he says, you're going to start with Baba. And he says, start with Baba. He goes, tie up with Baba. He goes, and then when he goes, push Baba off and turn around, because Andre will be in the corner, and chop the shit out of Andre. And he goes, and then go back. Well, they get in the ring, and Baba starts, and he and Johnny go, and Johnny pushes off Baba, turns around, Andre's right there, and chops the living shit out of Andre. Johnny turns around, and Baba's laughing his ass off, and Andre just puts his hand out to tag. Tag me in. And Johnny runs over to the other side to fucking Hanson to tag Hanson in. And Hanson's on the floor laughing his ass off. Just saying, he's all yours, kid. And Andre took Johnny to Don't Chop the Giant school. And Johnny learned real quick Andre didn't like chops. So there were, those kind of things. But again, if you took it, then you were fine with Andre. But didn't particularly care for the chops and shit.
We got lots of questions about this. I'll pick one here. Ryan says, why does Andre get a pass for being a bully when others don't?
I don't think he was a bully, and it was a different time. I don't think Andre was a bully at all. There were guys, that were shooters. Was Luthez a bully? Because he was a shooter and a hooker, and because he would take advantage of guys sometimes in matches that tried him.
Well, I mean,
it's all in your perspective. I don't think Andre was a bully at all. I think that's coming from pussies that don't understand, the psychology of athletics back in the day.
Pussies like Jake Roberts.
Did Jake fucking say that Andre was a bully?
Well, he just told the story of him standing on his hair.
Yeah, he did. You know why?
No.
Because he could.
Isn't that what bullies do, though?
Not always. Maybe Jake had done something that Andre didn't like. I don't know.
Okay. But you got to get hot about it. Jonathan says we've heard
again, it's your own perception.
Jonathan says we've heard plenty of stories about performers that Andre didn't like. I'd love to know about a talent where Andre took an immediate liking to them. That's kind of interesting. We've heard that, he had the rockers had to warm up to him and that took time, and, he didn't like Brother Love, et cetera, et cetera. Do you remember anybody that Andre was immediately like, that's my boy right there. We're going to be friends?
Not that I can really recall, and, maybe in his early years, but in his later years, no, Andre pretty much just wanted to do his thing and that was it.
I know you weren't around for WrestleMania 7, but we did get a lot of questions saying, hey, was it true that it was considered Undertaker Andre WrestleMania 7?
Well, I was there for WrestleMania 7 and no, it wasn't.
Sorry. You weren't there for 8. My apologies.
Yeah. For 8. No. And I was Andre there for 8?
No.
Yeah, no, not to my knowledge at all. But because at WrestleMania 7, it was the managers all vying for who's going to manage Andre. And that was the storyline coming out of WrestleMania 7.
Clint Novak says, was there anyone Andre flat out refused to work with?
Not that I can ever remember, no.
Captain Chaos wants to know, once Andre didn't like you, were you on his shit list forever, or could you work your way back into his good graces?
I think that I think that yes, you could work your way back into his good graces, and it just, a lot of times it was misunderstandings and things that just needed time to work themselves out. With Warrior, Andre took Warrior as a challenge to see if he could get him over. And not everybody liked Warrior. So it was kind of like, all right, let's see what you can do. And Andre took a lot of pride in being able to, in his mind, get Warrior over and get Warrior over more. Warrior didn't listen to him a lot in the beginning. Andre was able to slow him down. He slowed him down because he was going too fast with a big fist in the face. And the part that made Andre chuckle is that, you could see Warrior's eyes cross and his knees buckle, but he never went down. So Andre was like, okay, he didn't go down. He's either going to slow down now next time, or I'll guarantee you next time he will go down. But it was that was kind of the start of Warrior at least gaining a little bit of respect from Andre.
Plus Bucket says Andre was famous for patrolling the locker room. What was the funniest story you recall of Andre kicking someone out of the locker room?
Probably Michael Hayes and the Freebirds. Now they'll debate this. Michael will debate this, but as legend has it, Michael and Buddy and them showed up. I think it was to Chicago late and came in, and Andre was like, "You're fired. Get out." And they were sent on their way. So there's a lot of disparaging. Michael says they never even made it to the building. I'm going with the folklore and Andre because to me, it's just sounds better. Andre telling, "Get out." And Michael going, "Deep, deep, deep, I'm out."
Craig says, we know how Vince felt when Andre showed up on Clash of the Champions. What did Bruce think?
At the time, I thought that it brought Andre down. I thought that, Andre had been synonymous with WWE and a larger product. And I thought that it just kind of brought Andre down a little bit.
It's interesting that you feel that way. Mike says stories are legendary about who he didn't like to work with. Who was Andre's favorite opponent?
Andre, yeah, I'll tell you what, Andre loved working with Harley. Really enjoyed working with Harley Race. Andre enjoyed working with Jack Lanza. I think he enjoyed working with the Sheik. But there were a few guys that Andre really enjoyed, coming in and having fun with. I saw some matches with Harley and the spoiler Don Jardine that were just absolute classics. I mean, fucking Andre selling all over the place for Jardine. So I assume he liked him too. But you go back and watch some of the early stuff and see how quick Andre was. It's scary.
JPS wants to know, was Bad News Brown the only one who ever got a Cleveland steamer from Andre the Giant? I guess we should explain. There is a famous match that I'm sure you've heard about where Andre had been drinking and during the course of a match had a situation, and that situation resulted in a lot of splatter on Bad News Brown, who became a new shade of brown, rolled out of the ring, went straight to the showers and all of his clothes. And I don't think those fans will ever forget that sight, will they?
I think that any time that a Giant explosively shits all over someone is a sight that you wouldn't erase from your memory anytime soon.
I'm sure. I mean, I know you weren't there. It didn't even happen under a WWF banner, I don't think, but you had to, this became one of those telephone, telegram, telewrestler type deals, right?
Yeah. And again, I think that sometimes it's been told so many different ways throughout the years that, who knows how much, of the truth of what actually really happened there. Did Andre fart and he smelled shit and thought, "Oh my God, I got to get out of here." And, who knows, but yes, it's a legendary story.
It is funny the way you see those stories evolve. Like Bobby Rhodes tweeted, "Did Andre really take shits on the beds of the hotel and wipe his ass with the curtains?" No.
Well, there's no guarantee. We don't know that he didn't do it. Ain't no guarantee there, buddy.
It's so weird to me that wrestling is, as a genre, is just fascinated with poop. I mean, it's weird. Alan wants to know, did Paul Bosch have any good Andre stories, or do you have any good stories of them together?
I've got the pictures of when Andre went with Paul, and Paul wanted to get Andre's forearm and hand bronzed. So he had Andre go to the place that did the French Angels death mask and everything, and put Andre's from his elbow down into this cast. And Paul's thing was anybody that could fill or come close to filling this bronze cast of Andre's forearm and fingers and hand, they'd get 2 free ringside tickets to the matches. And one guy came in, older gentleman, big tall guy. Now he didn't fill it out in girth, but he was able from elbow, and his fingers actually filled the holes in length as Andre. And Paul felt he came that close, he gets 2 tickets, because he never thought, and no one ever remotely even came close from there. And then Paul had Andre's foot bronzed as well. Now, those 2 things were sold. I believe a collector in Japan has both of them now. And I wish they wouldn't have been sold the way they were, but that is what it is. And Paul and Andre had a good relationship. I remember Paul gave Andre the watch Andre used to wear was a pocket watch. It was a pocket watch, and then Paul had them put a band on the pocket watch, a real nice gold band on the pocket watch, and that was Andre's watch. So he just turned it, and that was the his wristwatch, and it looked normal on him.
It's pretty remarkable. A wristwatch looks normal as a pocket watch. Talk to me about drinking. We got lots of questions about he's a legendary drinker, blah, blah, blah. Was there anyone that you ever worked with in the wrestling business who could come close?
Phew, no. Like, not even close.
More than Undertaker, more than Flair, more than Harley.
Yeah.
More than Hogan, more than Cena.
Yep. Not even close.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, again, it was, I remember Harley sitting there with him and drinking beers and shit. And Andre would drink 2 to his 1.
Did you ever meet Andre's daughter?
I did not. Never knew her, never met her. Didn't know about her until much, much, much later.
Brian wants to know, outside of the ring, what would you consider Andre's greatest contribution to wrestling to be?
I mean, outside of the ring, I think his greatest contribution was probably Princess Bride and the longevity and being a part of a classic movie that will be enjoyed for generations. And people will always go, who was that giant? Well, that was Andre the Giant.
Having chatted with, this is from number 9, having chatted with Ken Patera multiple times, he always glowingly talks about how Andre would sell for him. Did Andre prefer working with guys who had credibility outside of the squared circle, or was someone like Patera just lucky to have fallen on the good side of Andre?
No, Andre was a worker, and Andre was a great worker. Back in the day, Andre, felt that it was his job to get people over when he worked with them as well. And, Ken was a big, strong son of a bitch that he was the real deal. But Andre, man, shit, Andre sold for Gino Hernandez and guys like that. If you were a good worker and respectful, Andre worked with you.
Well, listen, now's as good a time of any. People are ready to hear the Andre Blumpkin story that you've teased for 4 years.
Oh, God. No, I can't do that.
Well, listen, I'm excited that we're talking about Andre. We've got a ton of notes. There's no way we're actually going to get to all of these, but we had so many good questions. I wanted to hit them up. Of course, Andre the Giant, we know, was born as Andre Rene Roussimoff, May 19th, 1946. Born in France. He's the 3rd of 5 children. Did you ever talk to Andre about his family? Was he the largest member of his family by far, or were they all big folks?
They were all big folks. I think he had a brother that was decent size as well. But Andre was the athletic one that ventured off from France to become a pro wrestler.
Allegedly, when he's born, he's over 13 pounds back in 1946. At just 12 years old, he's 6'3" tall. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, you had done a lot of stuff at an early age and seen a lot of things through the wrestling business and your parents' backgrounds and all that. Andre's the largest human you'd ever met at that time, right?
Damn right.
When did you know, or when was it sort of more common knowledge, this, pituitary issue that he had, this giantism for lack of a better word, was maybe a pretty dangerous proposition.
Well, again, I don't know that they really knew that much about it in the regions of France where he was. And as he grew up, that was just normal. They knew that he was different, knew that he was special. And, Andre embraced it and was able to go out and make money off of it.
Andre gets his driver's license at 18. And, I guess we should mention you only had to go to school till you were 14 at the time. So he quit school there. By 15, he's already 6'6". He's got a driver's license at 18 and he's going to move to Paris to become a wrestler, or at least train to become a wrestler. And, the following year when he's 19, he's featured in a wrestling magazine. He's billed as, Jean Fier, and he's 6'9", 300 pounds. He's got a 44-inch neck, they say, size 16 feet. But this is a different looking Andre than the one we saw at WrestleMania III. It's probably worth a Google for our listeners, is it not?
Yeah, when Andre came, Jean Ferret was his name, and then he became Le Géant Jean Ferret. And here was this big monster, and they brought him, they finally brought him over to North America, to Montreal. And it's in Montreal where he had the good fortune of meeting Edouard Carpentier, who became a huge advocate of the Giant, and also Don Leo Jonathan, who in his own right was probably one of the largest wrestlers in the business at that time. So you had the Mormon Giant and Don Leo Jonathan, and then you had Jean Fier, the Giant, who later became Andre, and they had legendary matches and legendary rivalry in Montreal, that they were able to take this rivalry and able to tour it and go different places with it and have big matches around the country with it.
Do you remember, or did you hear the story about Vern Gagne first laying eyes on Andre and wanting to train him for boxing, thinking, man, we could make so much money if this was like a real thing, the biggest boxer in the world? Because heavyweight boxing was obviously big box office. I mean, it captivated, sports fans worldwide in that era. That would have been interesting, I suppose. Did you ever hear that was a harebrained idea of Vern's?
God, I've heard so many different, ideas for what to do with Andre, from boxing to playing football, things of that nature, that a man of his size and athleticism, it's endless. Some of the things that you could have done with him. And I think that the attraction of Andre the Giant as a wrestler was probably the best. It was the closest to being in the circus and being able to perform and travel the world at your own leisure, so to speak, was probably the best option for him.
Did you ever hear the story of General Adnan, who I guess was childhood friends with Saddam Hussein? He eventually started to book some events over there under Hussein's directions. And in 71, supposedly Adnan brought the Giant over to work a match, and they had built a custom bed for him and had a oversized Mercedes to drive around. And they'd planned to do in a best of 3 series, but I guess Saddam Hussein didn't know what wrestling was and tried to give Adnan a pep talk about being victorious, and we're counting on you. And this is like out of a movie here, is it not?
Well, again, man, you got to look back in 71 too, though. We weren't, Saddam Hussein had not become the ruthless dictator that he became to be.
Right.
And, it was this leader of Iraq. It's where, Adnan and Hussein were friends. They definitely were friends. And so, yeah, I could definitely see that. There's so many guys that, are giving them pointers and shit and not understanding the workings of the business. And in 1971, it wasn't as widely known. We protected the business back then.
It's just crazy to me. I mean, supposedly during this, Saddam goes to Adnan and says, be victorious. This guy's a big pussy. You can beat him. If he hurts you in any way, he's going to get this. And he lifts his coat and shows a solid gold gun. And he says, I will put every bullet there in his fat head and send it back to France in a pine box. How much of this is legend? How much of this is rumor and innuendo? We'll never know, but it is interesting to think that once upon a time, not only did Andre wrestle for Saddam Hussein, he also wrestled for Donald Trump at Trump Plaza. It's pretty crazy when you think about how wild and fantastic wrestling can be at times.
Oh God, dude! I mean, all along, and President Bush Senior as well, who was a huge fan of
Right.
Andre's and come out and stuff. So I mean, look, Andre the Giant. Well, everybody knew who Andre the Giant was.
Right.
You didn't have to be a wrestling fan. You just had to be alive, and you knew who Andre the Giant was.
Somewhere early in his career, I think it's Paul Vachon who tells Andre, hey, don't let the wrestlers body slam you. Of course, everybody wants to do that and it makes them look good, but it'll mean more down the road if they don't. And I guess that really is the less is more, and you gotta keep them coming back. Do you think that would work today? Today, it feels like you would have to do it early and often.
No, you wouldn't, and that's the thing. If you make it special,
It is.
then you are special, and I think that that's probably one of the issues when you compare today's business to the business of yesteryear, is that now nothing's sacred, and if you keep things special for people, if everybody does it, what's special about it?
Correct. Well, we know that the Vachons are going to wrestle in Madison Square Garden for Vince Sr. And while they're going to pitch Vince about the Giant, Andre the Giant. And I believe it's the Vachons who even suggest perhaps you could book Andre around the country. And I guess the thinking was there's not much more the Vachons can really do with him since he'd been in Montreal for several years. So a couple of months later, he does make his debut for the WWF. It's in Philadelphia. It's a handicap match, but for several days, posters had been hung on the walls in Madison Square Garden to hype the March 26th debut of Andre the Giant. And, obviously it takes Vince Sr. 1 week to offer Andre the opportunity to represent him and be his agent. And so he starts booking Andre around the country. Similar to the way the NWA would book their world champions, where Andre would get a percentage every time that a promoter used his services. So he's able to service these other territories, but Vince still has him in his territory as well. And he's going to average about 3 big shows a year for Madison Square Garden, from 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, and 79. Vince Sr. had the vision of less is more. We've got to use this guy as an attraction. Do I have that right?
Yeah, but Vince had that vision, with a lot of guys and everything. And that when you started in the territory, the first thing you got was your out date. That's when you're finishing up.
Right.
Because it was very seldom the guys were able to stay there for years and years. But if you were coming in as a heel to work with the champion, the first thing you got was, all right, here's your start date and here's when we're going to finish you up. And you knew exactly when you were finishing up and when you were leaving. So it was obvious, you look at an attraction like that and you can't see the 7'4" giant wrestle every week. Then you've seen him and then he becomes normal. He becomes your next door neighbor. I see him all the time and it's not special. The rest of the country hadn't, and you could book him all over and he could make, a territory once, maybe twice a year. Sometimes different places. Houston would get him a couple, 2 to 3 times a year. And then every time that he came in, he was special and he was unique, and people would see him the first time and you'd tell your friends, oh my God, you got to see this 7'4" giant. He's larger than life. And the legend grows each and every time. The less you see him, the better.
Let's talk about 1974. I think it's in this year that he gets invited to be on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Carson's not there that night. He's got a guest host, but still, for a professional wrestler to be on the Tonight Show in 74, And this is an era where, we're pre-cable. People have, 2 or 3 stations at most. And to have an opportunity to see a professional wrestler on the Tonight Show, that's pretty rare air. That's a pretty monumental deal, is it not?
Well, Andre was pretty fucking rare and monumental in and of himself. So everybody was talking about the 7'4" giant and putting his hand over everybody's face. And I think it was Joey Bishop, maybe, that there's a famous picture of Andre putting his hand over Joey Bishop's face. So it's good for the business. Gets the boss out there.
It's so good that at the end of 1974, he's listed as the 5th biggest draw in the world. He's even featured in the Guinness Book of World Wrestlers as being the world records, rather, as being the highest paid wrestler in the world. They say his documented earnings exceed $400,000, which these days doesn't seem like a ton of cash, but adjusted for inflation, that's like over $2 million. So he was doing pretty well for himself. What did Andre like to spend money on?
Well, he had to spend money on all of his clothes, obviously being custom made. And the beauty of it was, I mean, really, he only had time to spend it on wine and clothes and food, because he was on the road most of the time. And it wasn't like if you're in a territory, at least you're going to get home a couple nights a week. Andre didn't get home. His home was the road. So there wasn't an opportunity to go out and say, well, I really love my 4-wheelers. Great. You can love them all you want. You're not going to ride them anytime soon.
Right.
So it was a time where he just traveled all over the world, and his home was a suitcase.
In July of 75, the Washington Redskins, yes, the NFL team, held a press conference to announce they were interested in Andre the Giant, which is hilarious because the average NFL salary in that era is only like 50 grand. And, he's obviously making a multiple of that, but that's not the end of mainstream wanting a piece. By 76, there's another big opportunity looming. People want to talk about Muhammad Ali and Antonio Inoki on closed circuit, and Andre's on the same card preceding the main event. And Ali allegedly at one of these press conferences asked, "Do you think you can beat me up?" Or Ali asked Andre that, and Andre said something like, "I could beat you up and throw you out of the building," which is pretty remarkable. But this was a spectacle, and it was one that a lot of folks, and I think even Jim Ross has talked about the fact that he went and borrowed money to be an investor in this venture. What a happening Ali and Inoki was. What do you remember about that and Andre's involvement?
Well, let's go back to the Washington Redskins thing. Just again, the beauty of Andre the Giant was this was 100% a publicity stunt.
Right.
And this was a publicity stunt by the Washington Redskins that were able to utilize Andre and for them and for their popularity. So that's a pretty good deal. Then you get to the Ali Inoki deal, which is everybody knows who Muhammad Ali is, but no one outside of Japan knew who the fuck Antonio Inoki was. So you've got to be able to have stars on there that are going to attract a worldwide audience. And Ali in the United States of America, Ali worldwide, everybody knew who the fuck Muhammad Ali was. And for the most part, more people, knew who Muhammad Ali was than had ever heard of Antonio Inoki. Andre the Giant, than knew who Antonio Inoki was. So Andre and Chuck Webner had the beautiful story, the Bayonne Bomber and what have you, and his bouts with Ali.
He's the real Rocky. Yeah, he's the real Rocky.
He's the original. Yeah, he's what Rocky was based on in many ways.
Right.
And so Andre the Giant, Chuck Webner, I dare say, had as much buzz as, at least from a wrestling standpoint, from an overall knowledge standpoint, Inoki 100%, sold that attraction. Inoki, maybe in Japan, was important to that attraction. But the idea was to make somebody, and Bruno probably would have been able to sell that thing worldwide. It just was different. But Andre and Webner was as interesting, if not more, than the other. And at least Webner and Andre, get fucking Andre and Ali mixed up. Andre and Webner at least went out and did probably what Inoki and Andre and Ali should
Let's
have
just
done.
start over. You can't talk anymore. First of all, you keep saying Webner. It's Webner with a P, not a B.
Yeah, Chuck Webner.
How about
Bayonne Bomber? I know. Okay, you're gonna fucking start correcting me on how to say names.
Yeah, you need to get your shit together.
Stu Drosy. Okay. God damn it.
I'm making it sound fancier.
No, but it's not. He ain't fancy. He's a garbage man.
Well, whose idea was that shit?
It's a great fucking idea.
Yeah. I remember when he main evented a pay-per-view. I do.
Yeah.
Hey, so Vincent Kennedy McMahon did commentary on this show. It's a flop in America. There's 250,000 tickets sold in over 100 closed circuit venues. In Japan, nearly 60 million people saw the fight. This is sort of the original exhibition match. We just saw Tyson do this with Roy Jones. Now they've announced they're going to do it again.
Okay. But see here, this had to come from Meltzer probably, because of the way it's worded. So 250,000 tickets sold in America. Almost 60 million saw the fight in Japan because it wasn't sold other than the live venue in Japan. And so, Jesus Christ.
Wait, why are you upset? I'm trying to show how big this was. 60 million people seeing it is a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't believe that number. And also you're not taking into consideration where the closed circuit was a part of so many other events. So like Major League Baseball, a lot of their venues, they used this attraction for like, hey, after the baseball game, we'll have this fight. So there's a co-promotion in a lot of places that wasn't figured into that.
They also had other follow-ups where Inoki would beat Andre the Giant on October 7th. By referee stoppage. And then I guess we should mention in 76, we see him pop up in the $6 Million Man. Andre played Bigfoot in a 2-part episode called The Secret of Bigfoot. Lee Majors.
If you go back and you look, you'll get to see Bigfoot wearing sneakers in that. When the $6 Million Man chunks Bigfoot.
He's got sneakers on.
Yeah, you'll see he's wearing sneakers in his little Bigfoot outfit.
It's a pretty cool deal to be invited. The next year, in April of 77, Andre does take a booking in Louisville, Kentucky against Jerry the King Lawler. Photos of the match are taken and then sent to Bill Apter in New York. Apter liked the photos and published them in the magazine called The Wrestler. And under the photo, there was a tagline that says, "The night a midget defeated Andre the Giant." And the story described Jerry Lawler as being about 5'6" and using his quickness to surprise the Giant, throw him over the top rope with his superhuman strength, and defeat him by countout. And Cornette was there, and he said Lawler was in his element here, bumping like a ping pong ball for the world's largest athlete. Finally, Phil Hickerson and Dennis Condrey ran in to help. Lawler's DQ'd, and Rocky Johnson comes in to even up the odds. I'm mentioning all of this because it brings up a big debate. Vince Sr. is furious about all of this, and it causes a huge rift between Apter and Lawler for years. And to make it up to McMahon, Bill Apter puts Andre on the cover of the 1977 annual with the headline, "Andre the Giant, wrestling's only undefeated superstar." What do you remember of this controversy of a little guy beating up Andre the Giant and it making the magazines?
Well, not only that, it was making the magazines, which in New York, that's where the magazines were from, and they got a lot of play in New York on the newsstand. That was the only thing that a lot of people got to see from around the country. So, but the rub came at the NWA convention. And at the NWA convention is where Vince got a lot of razzing for, holy shit, your Giant lost to the midget, Lawler. And it was, Lawler's not a midget. Lawler's not 5'6" or
No.
whatever the hell they said he was. Um, and I'm sure that, Jerry put the Giant over like $1 million, and it was a disqualification. But at the same time, it's to people that don't know, it's Andre lost to a midget, because you read the headlines. It's like reading the gossip magazines and all that other bullshit. It's all headline, and then you get into it and realize that none of that is actually factual and nothing but a bunch of hearsay, innuendo, and bullshit.
All right. We got to get hot about it.
I did get hot about it.
His first title shot happened March 10th, 1976 in Miami Beach against Terry Funk. Of course, the champ's going to lose by DQ. That was common in the era. He is going to start facing Harley pretty regularly when Harley becomes the champ. And I guess he faces Harley more as NWA champion than any other NWA champion. We should mention, at some point in 76, he becomes an investor in a restaurant there in Montreal, a French cuisine restaurant. He worked all the big shows around the year. Of course, Christmas Day 78, he's working with Dusty Rhodes in New Orleans to crown the new NWA United States Tag Team Champions. And Andre and Dusty make it to the finals against Stan Hansen and Ernie Ladd. Andre and Dusty win the match and the title, but of course he's not here for long because he's got to make other trips. But still, it's a big deal to have these two, major attractions together. So I see why it drew and was a good idea. You mentioned earlier, you could see why Andre would show up at Clash of the Champions because Dusty could talk him into it. What was their relationship like outside of work, Andre and Dusty? You got a self-professed redneck who liked to hunt and fish and things like that. And then you got a guy who, well, he's a Frenchman. He's probably not into the same thing, but for whatever reason, they just got along great, right?
Yeah, but Andre was definitely, Andre loved the outdoors. He had his farm or his ranch there in North Carolina and everything. And Andre loved to go outdoors and see his big longhorn cattle and shit and ride around on his four-wheelers. So they did enjoy it. And I think Dusty, just being Dusty, was something that Andre really enjoyed. And, you could sit there and listen to the dream, spin a yarn, if you will. And he really, maybe you can't understand me, you big French man, but listen, I can't understand your mumbling either. So we're going to just sit here and talk like this a little bit back and forth. All right. That's what I'm talking about. All right, baby. So we're going to get funky like a monkey and bullshit like that. But no, nobody don't know what we're saying anyway.
Talk to me about another person that he didn't get along with, Blackjack Mulligan. Apparently, Blackjack was one of the only guys who did challenge Andre, and it happened more than once. Once they got into it when they were playing cribbage at Manny Fernandez's home. Everyone's drunk. Andre and Mulligan get in an argument. Mulligan punches Andre and they start a brawl. Nobody knows who won or how it even really ended, but it cost $1,800 to fix all the damage. And it's not the only time it happened. They got in a fight in a hotel and apparently went right through the wall in this hotel into the next room, which was occupied. But the most notorious brawl, based on all accounts, happened at Virginia Beach. They're on the beach and Mulligan just decides, hey, Murdoch, watch me here. And then goes over and sucker punches the Giant. Andre gets up, grabs both guys by their shirts, drags them to the beach. He's threatening to drown them. Flair's here and wants no part of that shit. And eventually everybody's fine and they start drinking again. But this felt like, almost a comedic situation where every now and again, Blackjack would get some of that firewater in him and decide, I'm going to go punch that motherfucker. He ain't so bad.
Oh, Baba Jack was a little bit crazy, if you will. He would get kind of a few too many of them beers. See, that's the thing with Murdoch and Baba Jack. They would like sit there, they drink their beers and guzzle them all down. See how many they could do as quickly as they could do. Well, the Dream just sat back. I drink just as many. It's going to take me twice as long because I'm going to enjoy it a little bit more. So yeah, man, Blackjack definitely kind of had a wild streak in him, and his legend goes. Tried the Giant a couple times, but kind of came out on the shorter end of the stick, and just I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe in his much later years, but when Andre was Andre in his prime, I don't know that there would be anybody that could touch him.
There's a lot of, famous opponents and famous feuds and all that we could talk about here today. But if you're going to talk about Andre the Giant, you got to talk about Hulk Hogan. And everybody always goes back to WrestleMania III, but back in 77 at a high school gymnasium in Gainesville, Florida, Hulk Hogan stepped in the ring with Andre the Giant for the first time. It was a battle royal. Hogan's working as the Super Destroyer. Of course, Andre won the battle royal, as you might imagine. But 3 years later, they take these matches to New York on a much bigger scale. Now Hulk Hogan's managed by Freddie Blassie, and he's billed as a muscle monster with a big ego. And their first singles match in the WWF is a house show in Binghamton, New York, March 28th, 1980. 8 days later, they're in Baltimore in front of a crowd of 10,000 plus. And during that summer, May and June, Vince would book Hogan in Japan, and he would first team with Andre alongside Dusty Rhodes in a 6-man. Process what that must have looked like. Andre, Hogan, and Dusty all on the same team. That sounds like a video game, dude.
And three of the biggest stars at the time. Think about it, in 1980.
It's unbelievable.
Yes.
Of course, when Hogan and Andre return, they're putting together a match at the Big Shea Stadium show. The big main event, of course, is going to be Bruno versus Larry Zbyszko. But they do put Hogan Andre on here, and Hogan slams Andre. And that's a big deal, of course. But the feud continues, and we've got our sights set on what's going to be a big attraction for years to come. When did you first see Hogan Andre? I mean, I know the narrative was always, WrestleMania III for the first time ever. But that was a little bit of showmanship. It had happened here, even within the WWF many times. When did you first see it that you recall?
Madison Square Garden. That's about the time, cable was taken off and people had the Madison Square Garden network on their cable systems, and you would go and you'd watch the live Madison Square Garden show. And that was the first time I saw it.
How do you think, we don't talk about this a lot, but how much different would wrestling have been had Vince Sr. not had a falling out with Hogan about the Rocky movie?
Well, I really don't know, because I'm not really sure how much Hulk's appearance in Rocky would have made a difference in his popularity overall. And I'm not discounting that at all, because Hulk was the most popular wrestler in the world at that time because of the movie. But I still think Hulk had the charisma and that larger than life persona to take it and go beyond.
Here's what I mean, I guess. If Hulk came in and continued down the trajectory he was on, he's getting hot, and Vince Sr.'s booking him pretty well, but then he becomes a bigger star under because of Rocky. Maybe Vince pushes him a little more. It makes me wonder if the business was now thriving all of a sudden and all these other outside opportunities were coming. Would Vince Sr. have expanded beyond his territory? Probably not, based on what we hear. Would he have been as inclined to sell to Vince Jr.? And if not, how different does wrestling look as a result of that?
Well, first of all, as far as Vince Sr. selling, that was going to, I think that based on Vince Sr.'s age and his desire to slow down quite a bit, that was happening. That wasn't determined on Vince expanding the business or anything else like that. Vince's father was getting out of the business. It was time to move on, and Vince made him an offer. I don't know. I think that those things still would have happened. So I just don't know how much I would have made. Now, when you look at how many other wrestlers could have filled that Rocky bill, we're talking about one right now, and that's Andre the Giant. Would have been probably a perfect foil for Rocky and Rocky III to do all the shit that Hulk did.
It's just fun to think about, what could have been. Ultimately, we know that, he was a legend everywhere he went. The stories of him visiting Japan are incredible, and him turning over cars. And in 82 is when he finally hears that he needs to see a doctor. about his condition. And around that same time, he gets opportunities to appear in a bunch of other TV shows like Greatest American Hero and The Fall Guy. But until The Princess Bride, he's not giving speaking roles. What's the likelihood that Andre could have just walked away from wrestling here, much like Roddy Piper tried to, and a few others? When he starts to get this new interest, it does feel like he could really, really slow it down or just walk away completely. Was it just the love of the boys or the crowd or the lifestyle of being on the road that kept him around as long, do you think?
I think it was all the above. Wrestling was his family, and wrestling is what he enjoyed to do. And it was the travel, it was the camaraderie, and it was the freedom to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. I think that Hollywood was something that could have been there. However, you know, you reach a max out point with an attraction like Andre in Hollywood. No different than you would anywhere else. If you see too much of him, then you've got too much of him, and he's only going to fit certain roles. Andre's not going to wouldn't be as versatile as, let's say, The Rock or even Hogan, just because of his size and his, he had a little bit of a barrier to entry with his accent and his lack of enunciation of the English language. So yes, Andre could have done some things and did do a lot of things in Hollywood, but I think that Andre's heart was in wrestling. Andre's heart was in the locker room with the boys.
Talk to me about the Iron Sheik. Allegedly he had an incident with him in '83 over in Japan. Did you ever hear about this, where they were drinking in a bar and Andre just starts fucking with Sheik and rips his pants? And I guess, Iron Sheik flipped out and threatened to cut him with a razor. It's a pretty weird scene. Did you hear about this one?
No, didn't hear about that one, but I could definitely see it happening. And I could see Andre laughing and telling Sheik he would do something with the razor if if he wanted to try.
I guess we should also mention that happened in '83, the same time that famous Kamala pistol story happened. Also '83 is when things come to a head. I guess one of his last matches with the AWA is in November of '83, and it comes out around this time that he was not having the best relationship with Vern Gagne. He didn't like that Vern wanted him to work twice in a night, a regular match and a battle royal. And he's asking to work with his friends, Mad Dog and Rick Martel. But ultimately, when he leaves in November of '83, Hogan goes with him. They go to Japan, and they never come back to the AWA. By then, Vince McMahon had already put his hooks into Hogan, and he's going to debut the following month. Well, fast forward, we know the story. January of '84, Hulkamania is born. We have a new world champion, and it's Hulk Hogan. How important do you think Andre was to bringing Hogan out of the AWA and to New York full time?
I wouldn't be surprised if Andre was somewhat instrumental in that. You know, that you go back and look at that whole thing, and the first contact was Steve Taylor, who was a photographer for WWE, that came and gave Hulk a note from Vince. Said, "Hey, here's Vince McMahon's phone number. He'd like for you to call him." And that's what really started that whole negotiation and that opening up that door for Hogan to come in and for all of that to take place. So I think Andre and Hogan had a good relationship, always did to my knowledge. And I'm sure that Andre did have a little bit of a say and say, "Oh, go to New York, stay there, good."
Hey, so here's the thing. The day that Hogan wins that world title in January of '84 and beats Sheik in Madison Square Garden, earlier in the day, that afternoon, Andre the Giant appears on David Letterman. And, they tape it during the day and it airs that night. But talk about your two biggest stars right there. I mean, even in January of '84, we got a new world champion in the main event. And oh, by the way, our biggest attraction is on David Letterman tonight. The company is headed in the right direction.
Yeah, not a bad day. Not a bad day for the company.
Of course, we know Vince is going to start expanding in '83 and '84. He's all over the place, and so is Andre. But there's a lot to talk about. I guess we should mention the biggest thing that he had in this era was the Big John Studd feud the body slam challenge, the $15,000 body slam challenge. It's old school, but you know, it is something for Andre to sink his teeth into. Do you think there was any consideration for Andre to do anything else during these first WrestleManias?
No, I think it was the only way to use him, quite frankly, because it's a natural with Stud, and then later on, Andre was throughout the years the natural for the battle royals. I think everybody that had a giant battle royal in their territory through the years, if they had built to one big giant night of a big battle royal, they wanted Andre for that attraction. So to be on WrestleMania and be with all those football players, it's somebody who could definitely handle himself and a logical winner.
Is it true that, Arnold Scotland was Andre's first handler? So we always talk about it as Tim White, but I think that's 85. Before that, it was Arnie.
No, the original was Frank Bauer.
Okay.
And then, Frank Bauer continued on until Frank got up in age. And then Arnie did it a lot for Andre in the WWE from, I don't know, probably the early 80s on. And then Timmy from kind of the early 80s on from there.
Is it true that the travel department referred to Andre and Tim White as Big Bear and Little Bear in code?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
Never heard of it in my life.
I was in a book somewhere and I thought, I gotta ask Bruce about that.
Depends on whose book it was.
It was your mom's.
My mom didn't write a book.
Yeah, she didn't do shit.
You want to? Okay, now we're going to moms, huh?
Well, I'm just saying, I have it on good authority. Back in the 70s, your mom was the original super spreader. I don't know though. It's just what I heard.
That's very rude. I would never say anything like that about Deborah, and I think you should apologize about my mother. My mother's dead.
She wearing a mask?
No, she's not wearing a mask.
Why not?
She's up right up there in an urn.
I put a mask on her just in case.
You put a mask on your mama.
Well, you were there for the Princess Bride thing. Talk to us about when he gets this big offer.
No, I wasn't.
Well, when the movie comes out, you know what I mean. You're not there when he shoots it. You're there when it comes out.
Was I really?
You don't think so?
No. When did that goddamn movie come out?
87, October of 87.
Get the fuck out of here.
Why would I make that up?
I don't know why you make shit up. Because you get your shit from fucking Dave Meltzer and it's all wrong. And I know that's made up. So yeah, I look, for Andre to be there's so many things when you look at The Princess Bride. It was a Rob Reiner movie, huge director, huge name, and it was critically acclaimed. Everyone loved it. So yeah, that was a huge fucking deal for Andre, but it was also a huge deal for the business. And I think that more so than anything, it was an opportunity to see Andre in a different light.
Right.
And probably, for most people to see him, you saw this kind of kind-hearted, and you got to see glimpses of the real Andre, the real boss in that movie. Hello, lady.
Let's talk about, the other opportunities that they had. They talked to Richard Keel. They talked to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They talked to Lou Ferrigno. They talked to a lot of folks who could have played this spot that ultimately Andre lands in The Princess Bride, but he has a booking cancel, and the WWF allows him to go at least meet with Rob Reiner. And dude, this is like, of all the things Andre did, probably the thing he was most proud of, right?
It was, because it allowed people to see him in a different light and prove that he could do something else other than just being the big giant in the wrestling ring. And that was something that, imagine living your life where every time that you step out of a private gathering or your own home, that everywhere you go, people are staring at you and pointing at you and whispering about you. and you're constantly being approached by strangers asking, "Are you so and so?" and "Can I get a picture? Can I get an autograph?" And maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you just found out a friend of yours or family member is sick or something like that, or maybe you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. But every single time that you went out in public, there was nowhere to hide. There was no way to escape. You couldn't disguise yourself. There was no place to get comfortable because everything was made for people half your size.
Right.
So yeah, he was judged an awful lot. I think that it was an opportunity for him to just be him.
Princess Bride was such a big deal. Not just for him, but for the company, because it was going to expose him to an even bigger audience. I do want to bring this up because it's become this legend, and I don't know if this is true or not. Maybe you can help us. Is it true that while Andre's gone filming this, Vince flies to him and pitches him on, "We want you to be a bad guy and we want you to wrestle Hulk Hogan at the next WrestleMania"?
Yes, that is true. And it was, Andre needed to get this surgery on his back, and Vince was able to talk him into getting the surgery and helping to find, the best surgeons in the world to work on him. Now you've got a multiple of complications and different things that you've got to consider with a guy Andre's size. They had to build special tools. They had to build a special operating table. They had to bring in experts from all over the world in everything that you could possibly imagine. And in addition to that, now the biggest concern is anesthesia.
Right.
You got to put this big bastard out. Now, that's one thing you can do your math and your geometry and all your shit to figure out, well, what would it take to put a 500-pound giant under? And you may come pretty close. Now you got to think, what will it take to put a 7'4", 500-pound giant out who has a pain tolerance that is off the chart and drinks 18 gallons of alcohol a day? Uh-oh.
Right.
What if this fucker wakes up in the middle of surgery? Who knew? Or what if you gave him too much and he doesn't wake up at all? So there were so many variables that they had to play with, and they literally had the best surgeons and the best everything in the world for that surgery. And thank God it was successful.
Well, Vince goes to visit the set in late '86. That's England and Ireland is when that's filmed. So fast forward, WrestleMania III is going to become huge. And that surgery you were just talking about was to relieve the pressure from spinal stenosis. It actually happened after WrestleMania, based on the data that we found. Everyone thought and said and continued to believe that it happened before WrestleMania, but it actually happened in July of '87. But still, on the way to the match, Andre realizes he needs to get in better shape. So allegedly, Vince offered Andre a chance to train at his home gym at his house there in Connecticut. So he'd start showing up for his morning workout at 9:30 in the morning and working out at Vince's house. We know that Vince set up a home gym or a gym at the office, the Titan Towers. How many of the guys over the years do you think went to Vince's house to train with him? Hogan, Andre, anybody else?
I'm sure Warrior worked out there. I don't know.
Well, the seed was planted that he might be turning heel on a November 29, 1986 interview, where they announced that Andre's suspension had been lifted. And Jack Tunney confirmed that Andre the Giant wasn't at the hearing, but Bobby the Brain Heenan was. And that's sort of a little hint. Fast forward to Superstars in January of '87. And that's the famous Piper's Pit episode. That whole Piper's Pit bit with Andre and Hogan is still one of the more legendary, quote unquote, interview segments of all time. Is it not?
Absolutely one of the best ever, and it was, also kind of cool because it was a little bit of a double turn with Piper going to the babyface side and Andre going to the heel side, but just legendary with Andre ripping the shirt and the cross off of Hogan, and that was just good shit. To this day, I don't believe that that it was planned for the cross to come off.
Right. Or the blood come out. I mean,
Yeah.
his fingernail nicked him. It was interesting. We should also mention in the build to that match, Andre wrestled one time. It wasn't necessary for him to do more. He had one match on Saturday night's main event. It was taped February 21st and it aired on March 14th. It's a battle royal and it saw Hulk and Andre come face to face. It does an 11.6 rating, a record for the time. I mean, really pretty remarkable. And then WrestleMania 3, man, what else is there for us to say about WrestleMania 3?
Well, yeah, absolutely nothing. But the thing on the build up is you didn't have to see Andre wrestle. You had seen the Giant for years and years, and that is what, you were going off of. You didn't want to see the Giant in the shape that he was in at that time. You wanted just be able to talk about the legend that the Giant was.
Lots of rumor and innuendo around WrestleMania 3. They retold it in the whole documentary that Hogan wrote it all out on a sheet of paper. I don't know how much of that I believe. There was concern, allegedly, will he do business? Will he cooperate? And supposedly he had 2/5 of Crown Royal that day. Do you think we'll ever know the real truth about that night or that match, or which version do you believe?
I believe that Andre was fucking with Hulk. I believe that Andre kept Hulk guessing and kind of wondering what he was going to do, if he was going to do business, just to kind of have fun with him. I don't believe for even a half of a second that Andre didn't go into that match and know from day one exactly what he was going to do and how he was going to do it.
And it was easy to see why this was box office. 1.6 million in ticket sales, 450,000 at closed circuit, 5.2 million gross there, plus another 450,000 pay-per-view buys. It's the biggest wrestling event of all time, no matter how many fans you believe were actually there. And supposedly Andre made $1 million for that show. Does that sound right to you?
I hope so.
I hope so too. WrestleMania 3, man, they did this all over the place. The next big super show is going to be brought up to counter program Starrcade. It's Survivor Series. It's going to be very important that Hogan and Andre are featured here. Andre winds up facing Bam Bam Bigelow, defeats him with a very safe double underhook suplex. He has his victory back over Hulk because Hulk's been counted out. And backstage, Heenan's calling for a rematch between Hogan and Andre. Was the whole moment where Ventura thought that Andre won the match at WrestleMania 3, was that planned going in to create some controversy to keep it going? Or was it just a happy accident that then you used to build Survivor Series forward?
I hope it was planned. I remember watching it live, and I was at someone's house, and when Joey hit the mat for the third time, I went, holy shit, they just switched the title. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And to me, it was a 3 count. It really looked like a 3 count. So I hope to God that they planned all of that was all laid out. I want to believe it.
Well, we've talked a ton about it. We know what's coming in early '88. The greatest wrestling angle ever, the double Hebner deal, the evil referee. Of course, Andre's right in the middle of all that. I feel like we've talked about that here 100 times, but the pairing of Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant just made sense because for all the heat that Bobby Heenan could get, you weren't going to use him in a match. And now we've got some limitations with Andre physically. Ted DiBiase can help fill the gap for some of that, right?
Well, yeah. And this was for DiBiase more so than it was for Andre. And it was kind of to anoint DiBiase as that top heel because you already had Hogan and Andre built as a personal issue. There was nothing more to do that would mean anymore. The championship, it was so beyond the championship at this point that you didn't need that in the story, and you could use the championship story with DiBiase and then spin it off into Savage. So to me, that just made sense.
Mean Gene told a story once about how much Andre didn't like working with the NBC folks. He says once Dick Ebersol was giving all these instructions, do this, don't do that, Andre gets frustrated, says fuck you, and walks right past him straight to the ring, just the way he always did and the way he wanted to. And Mean Gene says he violated Ebersol's authority as the executive producer of the show. It wasn't a rib. He just didn't like the guy. He recognized the authority. He just didn't want to do it. And if he didn't want to do it, he just wouldn't do it. You could talk to Pat Patterson or any other agents. If he felt it was a bad idea, he'd find a way to slip around it. Did you ever experience that? Andre not liking working with NBC?
Andre didn't like to be told what to do. That's for sure. I do know that Andre, at least from all the times that I worked with Ebersol and Andre and Ebersol had a great relationship. But I could see whether it was me or Ebersol or Vince or Pat or anybody else, if Andre didn't want to do it, Andre wasn't going to do it. And he would move on. There may have been an isolated incident with Ebersol, but I never witnessed any kind of animosity at all with Andre and Ebersol.
I just want to put this in perspective. That episode of Main Event does a 15.2 rating, but these days we talk about the number of viewers. 33 million people saw it. To put that in perspective, the NBA finals that year had 21.7 million viewers and the World Series had 34.5. Unbelievably, this storyline is now the biggest thing wrestling's ever done, right?
Absolutely. And people still go back to Hogan Andre. I think that, it was inevitable. Both talent had been built up to be just, you couldn't climb that mountain. So easy.
Andre's all over the show, making appearances at ringside and helping DiBiase. Of course, eventually he has the match with Hulk, but that's not what anybody remembers about WrestleMania IV. They remember the celebrity guest interviewer, Bob Uecker, and Andre the Giant doing the old, the choking deal, and Bob selling it so wonderfully. Were you producing that? Did you know immediately, holy shit, this is fucking magic?
That was actually produced by Dick Ebersol.
Really?
Yeah. And Dick did that shot, and I was standing right off as he was doing it. It was absolutely fabulous.
Why would he be producing a WrestleMania? He was just friends with Vince and enjoyed the work?
Because Dick would come in, yeah, and Dick would help us out on WrestleManias from time to time. Dick was there for WrestleMania, 2, 3, 4. I think he was there for 5. Yeah, 5. He may have even been there for 6. I don't think he was there for 7, but.
After WrestleMania, he goes to Europe for a tour, and he comes back and has a feud with Jim Duggan and eventually works a match with Bam Bam Bigelow at the Garden. And by all accounts, he beat the shit out of Bam Bam in this match. And it's been said, and even Bigelow acknowledged, he had a really bad attitude at the time. And this ass kicking from Andre, believe it or not, helped bring some perspective, fixed his attitude real quick. Do you remember hearing about Andre sort of keeping the guys in line like this?
Absolutely. And Bam Bam did have a shitty attitude at the time and kind of thought that he was the second coming. And Andre put him in his place pretty quickly during this time. It was a way of just keeping him in check. I remember the stuff with Duggan, where we did the angle with Duggan and Andre. And if you go back and look at that original footage, you see a very young Bruce Prichard down at ringside, almost getting my head taken off by Andre.
SummerSlam 88, you touched on earlier with Jesse Ventura as the special guest referee. It does huge business. It's sold out, 400,000 buys on pay-per-view. It's also his last major main event for a WWF show. He's still going to have some other matches, but not in the main event. But up to this point, man, so many, I guess really, pay-per-view had been built around Hogan Andre. And I'm not just saying in the company. I just mean in the pay-per-view industry. Between WrestleMania 3 and 4, the Survivor Series, which was created, the Royal Rumble, and then the February 5th main event on NBC, and now SummerSlam here, the very first one, the driving force behind all of those big shows was the Hogan Andre feud. I know these days people talk about the most important feud of all time is Austin versus Mr. McMahon, but really that's sort of chapter 2. Chapter 1 is Hogan Andre, is it not?
In the infancy of pay-per-view, the pay-per-view industry would tell you that WrestleMania in and of itself and WWE was what built the pay-per-view industry and live event wise and special events. And in that, when you look at what those attractions were, the answer is yes, Hogan Andre, without a doubt.
It's been written that 1988 was probably Andre's biggest year financially. Does that make sense to you? You know, having the movie come out in late 87, WrestleMania 3 was even 87, but here in 88, I guess perhaps with all the different new pay-per-views that you're doing, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, WrestleMania, would that have been his richest year, you think?
All things considered, I would imagine 87 and 88 were probably Andre's best years.
It's pretty remarkable to think that happened, by the way, when he's just 42 years old. He's been wrestling for 22 years. And I think a lot of people think of him in 88 as being sort of older. He's only 42. Of course, in late 88, he's going to be working with Jake the Snake. And well, you know the deal, you know what he did the rest of his career. We've touched on a lot of it today. We've bounced around quite a bit, but Big John Studd winning the Royal Rumble to just referee a match at WrestleMania. I don't know. That always tickled me. Feels like a rib from Andre, even though Andre didn't make those decisions, but we just know that for whatever reason, Big John Studd and Andre the Giant just did not get along. Right?
No, it wasn't a rib. It was a way to build Studd and build him slowly and keep him away from Andre to get to your natural Studd Andre rivalry after that. But Andre wasn't crazy about getting that thing started, and it was shortly thereafter that you had a really grumpy Giant that made Studd just say, you know what, fuck this, and leave.
Yeah. So he works with Studd, he works with Jake, he works with Warrior. And then by SummerSlam 89, I think the rumor and innuendo is that Randy Savage was going to be teaming with Andre the Giant, or at least that's what Andre thought. Vince had other ideas, and Randy's going to be teaming with Tiny Lister, who we know was Zeus. Do you remember hearing or knowing or understanding that Andre was upset about being left off of that SummerSlam 89 card?
No, because he was, to my knowledge, was never a part of it.
A week before is when he has that incident we've touched on before with the cameraman in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Ultimately, that all worked out. He had to pay a fine. He had to pay some damages, but he didn't have much more to do other than that. Saturday night's main event, we see Warrior face Andre for the Intercontinental title, which he had just won back. And it is the last time that we would see Andre wrestle on Saturday night's main event. And the readers of the Observer thought it was the worst match of the year. In 89, what were you guys thinking was the future of Andre? I mean, he's only 43 years old. So he's not terribly old, but boy, he's not moving very well. Vince has to be a little concerned about his health, but you also want to be respectful of the boss. So as we're winding down 89 and heading into 90, we know we're about to do the Colossal Collection thing and all that, but where was Vince on the long-term future of Andre? Was it just day by day and let's see what we can do? Or did he have a bigger plan that maybe he just didn't share with you?
Well, no, the idea with Andre was to return him to attraction status, and you would only see Andre 2 or 3 times a year. And Andre wouldn't be traveling on the road, up and down the road, making the towns and things of that nature, that you would put him on the shelf and pull him out when you needed him. Andre's feeling on that was that Andre kind of felt he would just, wither up and die if he wasn't out on the road all the time and doing things, and didn't feel that his body would be able to hold up if he wasn't constantly on the road. And I think Vince was thinking the other way, that let's get you in better shape and let's let your body heal a little bit. Then when we come back, you don't have to do a whole lot as the Giant. but just to limit the exposure some.
Well, they were limiting how much they were showing too. He has his only, as far as I know, his only pinfall loss ever in the Garden in October of '89. It happens to the Warrior in less than 30 seconds. But Andre would get on the mic and protest that, hey, the bell never rang, so that shouldn't count. But still, he wasn't doing a lot of clean jobs, much less in the Garden. I think that's the only one.
Andre put Warrior over every single night in every major market. Their first round.
December of '89 is when this Colossal Connection deal happens and they beat Demolition to win the tag champs. It happens in less than 5 minutes and it airs on Superstars of Wrestling on December 30th. It's kind of interesting because we know that they're going to wind up having a rematch. They're going to do some stuff at Royal Rumble, but they really have the payoff at WrestleMania. And Bobby Heenan was sort of the catalyst to turn Andre heel years prior. And now here at the close of WrestleMania 6 or their match at WrestleMania 6, which we recently talked about, in the archives at somethingtowrestle.com, you see Andre really get into it when Bobby slaps him. He's cutting a promo on him, really cursing him up and down and tries to paintbrush him or whatever. And Andre puts his hand on Bobby and immediately you see the whole crowd totally turn. Nobody really wanted to boo Andre.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. And it was a simple deal with Bobby, and you got right where you needed to be with now the beloved giant and allowing people to cheer him. And he's a legend.
Around the same time, I think everybody, including the boys, thought this was going to be sort of Andre's swan song, and Brett did the whole cartoon sort of paying homage to Andre. And I guess this is when the relationship with Andre and Vince starts to sour, right?
Well, I think that again, there was just, I don't know that they were on the same page as far as, how Vince wanted to use Andre and how Andre wanted to be used. It was, you could do one of two things. It's go be put on the shelf or put him on the road and not really realize how long he was going to be able to last on the road. And that was kind of the big thing. And it just wasn't easy.
WrestleMania 7, he makes his official return. And this time it feels like Mr. Perfect, who's a part of the Heenan family, is defending against Big Boss Man, and Bobby Heenan is about to take an unfair advantage over the challenger. And Andre comes down to the surprise of everyone. Fans are going nuts. They're chanting his name, and everybody's going to take a big bump for him. So now he is officially split from Heenan's family. He's a storyline free agent. And every week a manager is trying to recruit the services of Andre the Giant. In the parking garage, we see the Doctor of Style Slick thrown in the trunk of a limousine with Andre sending him to New Jersey. In a restaurant, Mr. Fuji got his face shoved into a cake. In a bar where he's drinking with some friends, Sherry's trying to seduce him. And of course he turns her down and spanks her for her troubles. This feels like a series of Bruce Prichard vignettes. Did you shoot these?
Yeah, these are the last ones I did before I was ceremonious or unceremoniously fired. So yeah, we did these over WrestleMania 7 weekend.
Really remarkable. Of course we know that Earthquake is gonna get the heat on the Giant. And I think in real life, the Giant needed knee surgery. So this is an opportunity to do that down in Mississippi. And supposedly he receives a giant get well soon card with a drawing of Andre's knee in a cast signed by the majority of the roster and Vince McMahon. Pretty cool to know that he still had the respect of everybody here in 1991.
Yes, he definitely did. And that was, look, Andre was the boss, and when he was gone, he was sorely missed, and everybody did want him back.
We should mention, when you're talking about when he was gone, SummerSlam 91 was Andre's last appearance for the WWF in North America. 5 weeks after SummerSlam, he was sent to Europe to be in Davey Boy's corner against Earthquake. And that's his last run with the company. So I guess by getting to go on that European tour, he's able to end his career where it all began. And after he retired, he went home to North Carolina, and He's got his Texas Longhorns there. It's an interesting story that he's had. He works a few matches into two, but it's really just a spectacle. But in September of 92, that's when he baffles everybody and shows up at Clash of the Champions in Atlanta. And Shane McMahon was quoted as saying, when Andre showed up on Ted Turner's broadcast, it was just a shock. A lot of hurt feelings going around on the other side of that. And we know it's not too terribly long from this, and we would learn that Andre the Giant passed away. He's playing cards on January 27th and drinking beer at a coffee shop. And they said that he looked tired, like he was experiencing back pain. And the only way they knew that is because he's leaning up against a wall. He gets back to his hotel after midnight. He goes to room 108, goes to sleep. And the next morning on the 28th, there's a driver there to pick him up at 9:30, but Andre didn't answer the phone. And when there's no answer, even past 3:00, they decide we need to go check. And they did, but it was too late. He was not breathing. And now they've got to figure out what in the world to do with him. And this sounds crass and crude, but they have a body of someone overseas now, and his family's in France, but he lives in North Carolina. What do we do? And eventually they fly his body to the United States, and they cremate him according to his wishes, and his ashes were scattered at his ranch in North Carolina. And he left everything to his daughter, Robin. It's pretty surreal, man, to know that a legend like this had it feels like Andre was a part of wrestling forever in my lifetime, but really it's only a handful of years of my fandom. I guess the lesson there is, let's appreciate what we got while we still got it, right?
Yeah, and Andre will continue to be a part of everyone's fandom if you're a fan of wrestling, because he was Andre the Giant. He was the first, he was the biggest, and he was the best. So to that, Andre the Giant lives on forever, and it was just such a shock at the time when Andre left us, and Pat, Randy Savage, and Vince made the funeral. Moolah was there. There's a few pictures of that funeral. I'll never forget Arnold Skolin. Arnie didn't want to go because Arnie didn't want to see his friend's ashes scattered over a cow field, as Arnie put it. But that was Andre's wishes. Andre, that's where Andre wanted to spend the rest of his life. And that's where he wanted his ashes. So everyone respected those wishes and did just that. And it was a little surreal. It was really a little surreal, because all of a sudden he was just gone.
I do want to mention something that is rumor and innuendo, but I feel like it's worth discussing. Allegedly, one of the holdups as he winds up staying, his body was overseas longer than maybe it needed to be, is they couldn't figure out exactly how to transport him back because they didn't have a casket large enough. And the rumor and innuendo is that when Vince McMahon learns of this, he has one custom made and sent over so they can bring Andre home. So if you see pictures of Andre's funeral and a giant casket and you wonder, why is there a big casket? I thought he was cremated. You're correct. He was cremated, but they needed a way to get the man from France to here. And the way to do that was to create a custom casket, and no one over there could figure out how to do that or what to do. And Vince took it upon himself to build a giant casket to get his friend home. It's such a sad deal to know that those guys weren't on the best of terms at the very end. When was the last time you talked to Andre?
Last time I talked to Andre would have been his last date. And that was, well, no, you know what? I take that back. I'll tell you a story about Andre. When I was fired, and it was Vince's 45th birthday or something like that August. I was still in Connecticut. And even though I'd been fired, I had been invited to this surprise birthday party for Vince. Went with Piper. And when we got there, Andre, it was at the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center. and Andre's sitting on a bench outside the deal, and it was presented to Vince that this was a big celebration for Dick Ebersol. He was getting a big award, and that Vince was presenting the award. That's what they did to get Vince to show up there. And beforehand, I was there with Regis Philbin and Piper and Heenan and a few other guys. And I thought it was so cool, Regis Philbin asking about me and what happened, and I'm going to talk to Vince. But Andre asked me, he says, "Where have you been?" I said, "Boss," I said, I got fired in May. And he was like, "Why?" And I said, "Look, man, I didn't really get along with Flip." And I said, "We just kind of came to an end, and Vince let me go." Now, this is Vince's birthday, and it's his night. And Andre cut a promo on Vince about firing me on Vince's birthday at his birthday party. Not a big deal, but it was like, you keep all these other and you get rid of him and he's white. And so that was kind of cool on Andre's part. And I think that was the last time I saw the boss.
It's a pretty weird deal to think about it in hindsight about what a big impact he had and how famous he was. And it all happened, before cable TV, before social media, he was like one of the last great stars. Like everybody in the whole world knew who he was. And this is pre-internet, and that's pretty fascinating to think about how it could be that big. What do you think ultimately will be his legacy in professional wrestling? Will it always be the feud with Hogan and WrestleMania III? I mean, he set so many records with it. Biggest cable rating, biggest TV rating, biggest gate. I mean, just unbelievable.
I think that he's going to go down as the original eighth wonder of the world, because that's who Andre was. And he was arguably the single biggest attraction in the world, in the wrestling business, for many years, because you could put Andre the Giant on your card and you would have a sellout other than add his name. So I think that the eighth wonder of the world and one of the greatest attractions in the history of the business.
Bruce, I had fun visiting Andre the Giant, talking about Andre the Giant with you. We didn't know when we first got going how long we would go. We both thought, well, it'll be a little over an hour. Well, we're nearly 3 hours now, but we needed a giant-sized episode to pay tribute to such a giant athlete, right?
This is true. That's not fair. You're stealing my shit.
You didn't tell me you were going to say that. I was just guessing.
Well, I just thought it as you were leading up to that. I was going to say, well, it takes a giant episode to cover a giant. Then you went and stole my shit, because telepathically.
Oh. Yeah, that.
Just did this right here. See, we did that. I went from here to there, and it went all the way to Alabama and came out in a Southern accent, because Lord knows I don't have a Southern accent.
Not at all. But what you do have is another bonus Geico episode coming your way before the end of the year. We're also still going to do In Your House 5, and of course the No Holds Barred watch along. I'm pretty pumped about that. That's going to happen on Christmas Day, because you know what they say, Bruce.
Why have a Merry Christmas when you can have a No Holds Barred Christmas?
Until next time, he is at Bruce Prichard. I am at Hey, it's Conrad, and we are out of time. We'll see you back real soon right here on Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.